Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special meeting of the Brant County Council. Attendance has been taken, noting that Councilor Chambers is not quite here yet. He hasn't sent his regrets, so he could just be a little bit late. Everyone else is here. Second thing on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Does anyone ever have anything to add? Seeing nothing, does anyone want to move the agenda as it stands? Councilor Oakley and Councilor Pierce. Anything else? Thank you. All those in favor? Do you want to just get that for me? No, there we go. Thank you. Number three on the agenda is the declaration of pecuniary interest. Does anyone have any? Seeing none, we'll go to number four, which is the oversight of Brant Water Systems Operations Municipal Drain Class Economical Assessment Training Session with Rob Walton. And you're already at the podium. Thank you.
Am I on? Good to go. Going to be here a while and might as well get it adjusted. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and we've got a big afternoon planned for you. Three big topics: water system oversight, municipal drains, and Class EA. There's a lot of subject matter here, and I've got staff here to do most of the presentation. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of each section, and then the staff that actually do the work are going to be here, and you're going to be able to ask them all the questions you want. We want to have some interaction in this, but I think to keep the momentum of the presentation going, the way we've structured each of the sections is we'll do the presentation, then we've got a break at the end for question and answer. So I think that's the most efficient way to do it. We sort of geared this presentation to be 3 hours, not 4. Then if we've got lots of questions, it'll go more, and we'll just see how that goes. And that's sort of the plan. We sort of thought setting it up for 4 hours, maybe going 5 wasn't probably the best idea. Only certain amount of subject retention out of any of these training sessions, anyways. So anyway, so we'll get started. So we sent out an agenda. We'll mostly be following that. We're going to start out with drinking water system overview. So everybody in this room has heard about Walkerton. And here's if you ever want to do actually, this is actually very good reading, these two volumes, part 1 and part 2 of the Justice O'Connor inquiry. Part 1 is just details the events that went on and what led up to Walkerton happening. It's quite a few years ago, but I have read this completely, and it is very interesting as to how the sort of perfect storm of a situation happened, which led to a big tragedy for sure. And then part 2 is really interesting because it's how Justice O'Connor then laid out what should improve in the water system oversight to make sure that Walkerton isn't going to happen again. And we're going to have a couple of direct quotes from Justice O'Connor out here, which lay out how council should be participating in the oversight of systems to make sure that bad things don't happen, like what happened in Walkerton. So the statutory standard of care comes out of the O'Connor recommendations from the Walkerton inquiry. It's been part of the Safe Drinking Water Act since 2002, and it applies to those with decision-making responsibility. So that would include, in this situation of municipality, councillors, mayor, senior municipal officials, which would include the CAO and senior staff. It does not go down to operators because operators are under they have other legislative requirements under Section 128, I believe it is, of the Safe Drinking Water Act, which talks about how training is done, how they get their licensing, and what their legal requirements are. So that's the reason for that. And I don't want to harp on this. There are legal consequences which could add up to huge fines and time in jail. That hasn't happened. There have been no court rulings on that yet, but I have heard rumblings of a situation where standard of care could be considered. I don't know. There's 2 years for these things to fall out in the courts, and whether it happens or not out of that case, I don't know. I haven't heard. in these situations, actual penalties would be decided by the court. So I'm going to hand out. It's very important you understand what you have to be as far as decision making over water systems. And the first thing you have to know is you don't have to be an expert, but you do need to be informed. You need to ask questions and get the answers to those questions when you need, and seek advice from those with expertise and act prudently on their advice. So in part 2 of the Walker inquiry, I've handed out just the section there on standard of care, and I think to read the whole section would be good for you over time. I've highlighted the piece of it that's of particular interest, but this is the direct quote from Justice O'Connor in this report. These individuals, counsel of case in this case, and senior staff, should be required under the Safe Drinking Water Act to act honestly and in good faith with a view to the protection of the safety of the consumer and to exercise the care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person, I think that's the most important part of it, reasonably prudent person would exercise in comparable circumstances. So it doesn't come in here and say you need to be an expert on water. You need to understand chemistry. You need to understand water treatment, whatever. But take the advice you're given, give it good thought, and ask questions and make sure you're well informed when you're making the decisions. I think that's the lesson to be learned here for standard of care. And I thought it was good just to that whole section's not very long in the report. That's why I just made that available to you, and you can have them. As I say, we do have copies of part 1 and part 2 here, which I would make available if anybody did want to read them. It's not easy reading, but it's very it's not difficult reading either. But it's long, but it is there's a lot of good stuff in there. So how do you do your oversight? There's a couple of ways. Section 11 of the Safe Drinking Water Act describes the legal responsibility of the owners and the operating authorities. Owners and operating authorities are responsible for ensuring that there is safe drinking water, that it meets the drinking water quality standards and are operated in accordance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, properly maintained, have adequate staff, supervised by qualified trained persons, and comply with all the requirements for sampling, testing, monitoring. And tonight, on the committee report from admin and operations, those water reports are on there. So that's part of how council gets its information, is that. And later on, we're going to go through other ways that you get information during the year on this as well. Wow, I don't know what happened to that slide. Section 19 is actually the standard of care part of it. We've sort of gone over this. You're legally responsible, the legal responsibility for decision makers that oversee the drinking water systems. Again, we went over the level of care that's required for that reasonably prudent person. And obviously honesty, competence, and integrity is required in making those decisions. I clearly have no idea what happened to that slide because the last time I looked at it, it did not look like that. Maybe it looks better where it's printed out, did it? I don't control technology. It does what it wants at times. So, there's different ways. So, the standard of care can apply to the owner of the municipal drinking water system, or it does. Typically, that's the municipality, as in this case. The question could be, can we download that responsibility to somebody else? And the answer to that is, as a municipal corporation, actually no. If you have an operating authority that's somebody like a third party, like the Clean Water Agency does it for some municipalities, you then share responsibility. Both have the same responsibility when you do that. So you cannot down delegate your responsibility. The only way you could get rid of the responsibility would be not to own the water systems at all. And I don't think in very many municipalities that's actually the case that could happen in Ontario. So next we're going to go over drinking water systems in Brant County, and Mike Biggin is going to come up and talk about that. And after that, we'll have Scott McDonald, or Dave Stevenson is going to do DWQMS, and Scott McDonald is going to do other parts of the operations.
All right, I'm Mike Biggin. I'm manager of environmental services. Over here we have Scott McDonald. He's the superintendent. Dave Stevenson. He's water technologist, DWQMS rep, and compliance rep, I guess, something like that. Keeps us compliant, anyways. And back in the back, Mike Mandel. He's a water quality technical specialist. So that's kind of your leadership group for water. Is all here, except for Alex. He's sick today. So the water staff at the county truly do it all. We do everything. Some municipalities contract a lot out. Other municipalities have people doing very specialized roles. Our water operators and in turn managers and leadership staff do everything. So water staff can be taking a BACT sample, fixing an instrument 1 minute, then going, helping a contractor install a valve in the road. A couple hours later, they could be at someone's house in their basement changing a water meter. So it makes for well-rounded operators, and that's what we want here is well-rounded operators that know what to do in every situation. And they're on call 24/7 as well. So any of those situations can come up after hours. So they really need to know that kind of stuff. So there's 5 systems, as you can see on the slide a little bit. There's 5 systems in the county. So there's Airport, Mount Pleasant, Canesville, St. George, and Paris. So Airport, just to give a quick rundown of each system. So Airport has 2 wells and an elevated tank, and it's fairly new, a couple years old. Mount Pleasant has 2 well pumps, a reservoir, and some high lift pumps there that keep the pressure to Mount Pleasant 24/7. Canesville has the water supplied from the city. I'm sure everybody knows that. And we have a elevated tank. St. George has 3 wells and an elevated tank. If you think of St. George, there's kind of the higher area of St. George and the lower area. So at the elevated tank in St. George, that serves the higher area of St. George. And then on the same property, there's a standpipe. And that serves the lower area of St. George like a water tower, except they put it up high. So it's a standpipe on ground. Then in Paris has 3 treatment facilities, many wells, pumping stations, pressure control valves, and 3 elevated tanks now. The new one just went into service recently. How do you change slides on this thing? Okay. Thanks. So source water protection comes in many forms. Different well fields need different types of protection. So for instance, the bedrock wells at Telfer, which is on West River Road down by the river, they're bedrock wells. The protection there is different from the protection needed for the Gilbert wells. The Gilbert wells are behind Sobeys. We have upper aquifer wells, which is basically a little better than a sand point, really. And so the Gilbert wells need a lot more protection because the threat is much more immediate. Whereas the bedrock wells, any threats we see there could be 10 or 15 years. It happened 10 or 15 years ago that we have to worry about. So the Gilbert wells, they need a lot of protection. We have to work hard to make sure that nothing encroaches on that wellhead protection area, and that we do a good job to keep it protected. And I know that we're in a situation right now where staff is working hard to make sure that stays protected with development inching up closer to our Gilbert wells. So this slide just shows some of the capture zones and the wellhead protection zones. As I said, some places in the county, there's a lot of pressure on those wellhead protection zones. So in the county, we have a multi-barrier approach, and the multi-barrier approach really protects the water. And how we do the multi-barrier approach is source to tap. So if we keep the source water good, then it's easy to treat. And because it's easy to treat, and we don't have to add a lot of chemicals into the water, it's very stable in the distribution system. So it's easy to deal with in the distribution system. We don't have to adjust pH or anything like that. We just basically add chlorine and fluoride for Paris and send it out the door for the most part. So it's really easy to treat, and that's because our source water is clean. We test it every week, and it is normally, all zeros on the report. So, technically we could, the raw water here is good enough to drink, unlike places like Brantford and stuff where they take it out of the river. You can imagine that's not really safe to drink right out of the river. So, the next thing we have is the SCADA system. So the SCADA system provides us with early alarm notification. So if the regulatory limit is this wide, we operate in here, and then we get alarms if it gets to this point or this point. So it really helps us get a handle on things before things get out of hand, because that's the last thing we need. The other thing that helps us is the drinking water quality management system that you'll hear about shortly. It makes us develop good practices and procedures so that we are operating at our best possible standard at all times, and it keeps us accountable for what we do. The ministry inspections that we have yearly, and the internal and external audits also know, if our program's working well and if we need to improve anywhere. So the ministry, just so you guys know, goes through every data point that we take in, every regulatory data point in 1 minute increments for the entire year. And they go through every logbook entry we've made for the entire year. And they match the two up and go through it line by line. So when we say that we have ministry inspection, it really is in depth. And then they come and physically inspect the plant as well and ask us a whole bunch of questions about this and that, and about their priorities for that year, which change year to year. So there's a lot that we have to cover with the ministry. I'm sure you are well aware of the regulations and stuff, and they take different priorities every year that we're able to pass every year, as you can see by the reports. So we have some governing documents. I'm not going to go through them all here, but the municipal drinking water license, drinking water works permit to take water. So basically they tell us what we need to do, how we need to do it. They tell us the pumping rates we can take water out of the ground at, how much per day, what we need to do for treatment. And we review those regularly, and so if there's changes in technology, or sometimes there's changes in chemistry that the ministry would like us to look at, we adjust all those as needed, and the ministry also adjusts them as needed to make sure that we are still delivering safe water if anything new comes along. So, is there any questions?
Councillor Miller, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Mike. Mike, so just to be clear then, the permit to take water, that gets issued whenever, but that can be changed over time. Is that reviewed annually?
Dave, I don't think it's reviewed annually, but
no, permit to take water is based on the system and complexity of the monitoring requirements. Typically issued for 10 years. Ministries kind of stabilize that, but they don't coincide with any functions, so they're kind of staggered for the renewal dates.
So it's done every 10. I don't ever recall it ever being changed. That's what I'm saying.
Water, so we just currently that's what we renewed last year. Year before that was St. George, and coming up this year we're doing we just submitted one renewal for the water application, which will probably get issued in the next 3 months.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking, like I said, I don't ever recall it being changed. And Mike, you said these things are changed periodically. And in the recent reports we got from the water department that we're passing tonight, you always look at the drawdown on the aquifers, you know, and so far, you know, knock on wood, we've had 3 dry years. It hasn't been, we haven't seen a decrease in the water. We're not mining the water, but I'm just wondering if that's something that would be looked at. As far as the permit to take water, is that something we would look at?
Yeah, so when we submit our application, we need to provide pumping data, historical pumping data with the application. The ministry reviewers look at that information, and based on that information, it could change our pumping allowances. But yes, it is provided to them, and they do review that data when renewing our applications.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To use Mike, a few questions if I may. What percentage of our residents are actually supplied by municipal water?
What do you think? I would say 60 or 65%. There's a lot of rural residents out there for sure, but we do supply. Like, I mean, obviously Paris is the lion's share. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And second related question, do we have any role in non-municipal water supply? Do we, I know we may not have a legal responsibility, but do we have a moral responsibility for making sure people look after their wells properly? Because, you know, if there are 35% of them, our population who are not getting the same security of supply that we're giving them, do we feel like we have an obligation to do something there?
There are ways under the source water protection where we can actually deem an area that we're of concern with and actually deem it of significance to have considerations for how that's operated and what happens in that area. I don't believe in Brant County in our source water protection area that has happened in our area at all. So there is the potential for that happening, but there are other regulations which cover those. So Reg 903 is the provincial regulation which deals with both drilling and sealing up of unused wells. There's a health unit oversight of private water supplies, and as everybody knows, and I'll do that for anybody that's online here, private water supplies can be tested through the Brant County Health Unit for free by taking the sample in the proper bottle and taking it in. And the health unit inspectors will deal with any things that come up with bad samples from there. And then there's Reg, is it 319? That's the community centers and the like, and churches, rural churches and whatever. So there's another regulation which covers them. Originally, they actually were under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And funny enough, I spent 12 years on the Provincial Drinking Water Advisory Council, and it was that group that actually recommended to the ministry that they take it out of the Safe Drinking Water Act, put it over the health units, and operate it in a risk management system under their guidance to take away the complexity that was there under the Safe Drinking Water Act, because nobody could really deal with it at the time. And I think we've got quite a good system there for those. So I think that describes how the other systems are dealt with.
Yeah, thank you to you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's a good answer, Rob. I like the answer. As long as we feel like we're educating our non-municipally supplied residents with the information they need to make sure that they're safe. So I think we're doing that.
Yeah, you knew part of the answer from your involvement with the health unit as well.
Yeah,
so that's good.
A couple of other questions, if I may, Mr. Mayor. We talked about water treatment, Mike. One of the constant nagging issues in Paris is the hardness of the water. Do we in any way treat the hardness of the water?
No, actually, we don't treat hardness, but if you remember, I talked about those upper aquifer wells at Gilbert. Well, they're actually, the hardness could be worse than Paris. we actually keep the hardness down by running those upper aquifer wells. If we just ran all bedrock wells, it would actually be terrible. So we try and blend the hard water with some soft water to try and do our best to soften it up. But yeah, unfortunately with bedrock wells, that's one risk we have. It's hard water.
Okay, thank you. Final question. What role do we have in monitoring gravel pit impacts on our water supply? I'm particularly thinking about the Dufferin aggregates pit, which created a lot of unrest locally, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
Under Dufferin's pit agreement and then their permits to take water, which they have to have, they actually have reporting requirements themselves, and they have to annually provide us with a report, which I believe in. We get it every spring, so we'll soon be getting their annual report.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Stevenson. I've been with the County of Brant since 2007 in the role of the water technologist. One of the recommendations of the Walkerton inquiry was the implementation of a quality management system. That quality management came as the Drinking Water Quality Management Standard, and I've been involved with the standard since it was required to be implemented in 2009. The plan follows a plan, do, check, and improve system. So it kind of emphasizes the importance of having a preventative and proactive system in place, define roles and responsibilities of staff, have procedures in place, identify risks, just to ensure that we mitigate public health issues and to ensure the supply of safe drinking water. We've established and documented management procedures, and like I said, clearly identified roles and responsibilities. And then one of the biggest pieces is continually improving our system. So we're always looking at procedures, policies, staff roles and responsibilities, and adjusting them accordingly so everyone understands what's going on in the drinking water systems. And if they don't know what's going on, there's documentation for them to review. And we're continually providing training to staff monthly on the system, on policies, on regulation. So staff is always aware current what's going on in the systems. So you're going to hear through this process and through reports of the owners and top management and the operating authority. So the owner, through the quality management standard for the County of Brant, is considered municipal council. You will also see in the municipal drinking water licenses and a lot of the regulatory documentation that's submitted and that you get through reports, it will note that the County of Brant holds the municipal drinking water licenses. One of the roles of council is to endorse the operational plan. There's 21 elements. The third element talks about commitment and endorsement. So staff looks after the quality management system. What the endorsement was is just to show that the owners approve of this plan and endorse the operating authority to implement the system effectively. One of the elements of the licensing process is having a financial plan, and council endorses that plan. When the county applies for its new municipal drinking water license in 2024, a new financial plan needs to be submitted at that time. That's for a 6-year period. And the financial plan just looks at all the aspects of the drinking water systems to ensure that the money that's coming into the county through rates financially sustains the drinking water systems. The owners must ensure that the county's municipal drinking water systems are operated by accredited operating authority. So the water division being the operating authority, the staff that runs it is certified to the provincial levels to operate the systems. They communicate with and provides authority to the water division. So when questions come in from staff needing this and this, council approves those. And then consider recommendations from staff. So through budgets and other recommendations to update equipment, add treatment systems, they go to council for budget approval, and that's the role of council for that. The quality management system speaks to top management. So the top management, doesn't have to be manager, so to say, but they are the group in the water operating authority that they're making decisions and recommendations. They make decisions on the quality management system, and they make recommendations to the owner about the subject systems. And that team includes the GM of operations, director of environmental services, and the environmental services manager. So the roles and responsibilities, like I say, we're always laying out the roles and responsibilities. So the operating authority is considered to be the water division. They are the person or entity given responsibility by the owners for the operation, management, maintenance, and alterations to the drinking water systems. So we're operating on the owner's behalf to make sure the systems are operational, providing safe drinking water, and meeting all applicable legislation and regulations. The operating authority is responsible for developing an operational plan. So the operational plan is a document. It's a public document. It's on the county's website. It lists the 21 elements, and it follows the quality management standard, and it's always being improved. And then, as mentioned, we need to ensure that council endorses that plan. Finally is the quality management system representative. That's my position and my responsibility and authority for administering and making sure the quality management system runs effectively. So element 9 requires an organizational structure. This is the structure as from the operational plan. It just kind of lays out how the organization works in regards to the drinking water systems. So as mentioned, the operational plan is the documented quality management system based on the DWQMS. It follows a plan, do, check, and improve system. So for the 21 elements, we plan what is required in the element. Once we've did that planning, we carry that out. Annually, we check the systems, and based on what we find from our systems checks on that review, we improve the systems. These are the 21 elements of the DWQMS. The first 18 are a plan and do elements. Elements 19 and 20 are more on the check side, and 21 continual improvement is on the improve side. So element 1, quality management system, just states that the municipality shall have a quality management system. Element 2 requires that we have a quality management system policy. I will go over that in a minute. Element 3, as mentioned, commitment and endorsement. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. QMS representative, as mentioned, I am the quality management system representative. I will provide information to staff, the public, to the owners on the quality management system to ensure that everyone is aware of what's going on. We're required to have a document and record control system. So the biggest pieces of that is to make sure that all documentation is current, saved and retained and protected from damage and loss, and make sure that it's available in a way that staff and anyone that needs the information contained in there has access to it. Element 6 requires the county have a description of the drinking water system, and then also consider upstream challenges, other impacts that could affect the drinking water system, and then just an overall description that if someone needs to know exactly about the drinking water systems, it's contained in element 6. Element 7 and 8 are kind of go hand in hand. It's risk assessment. So what it is that the operating authority considers risks to the drinking water system from the ground to the final transmission to the people. It's looking at the groundwater supply. It's looking at the well pumps. It's looking at the treatment systems. It's looking at the distribution system. It considers cybersecurity to our electronic systems. So there's a big emphasis on identifying all the risks. We score those risks looking at probability, severity, and detectability. And based on the scoring, allows the operating authority to put more emphasis on plans to address those emergency situations. So like a water main break, we have a procedure for water main breaks because it's a high risk. There's a potential for contamination to water. So there's a plan in place so operators can know what to do in an emergency situation. So that's one of the things we look at through this risk assessment. Element 8 lays out all those risks, identifies what the risk is, the procedure to help deal with that risk or to mitigate that risk. It identifies the scoring system for that, and then it just any action plans that staff need to follow in the event one of those risks was exposed. We review that once a year, and then every 3 years we start from scratch and do the entire risk assessment over again. Excuse me. Organizational structure, roles and responsibilities and authorities. We're required to list everyone in the operating authority, their roles, responsibilities, and their authorities. Competencies. This element lists the competencies required by all the staff working in the drinking water systems, and then what actions need to be taken to ensure they continually keep their training up to date, or industry knowledge as it rolls out that they're up to date on the most current and newest information in regards to drinking water systems. Personal coverage. This element describes on how the drinking water systems are staffed. So, regular business hours, these are the staff, this is the responsibilities. Weekends, this is the staff, this is the responsibilities. If there's an issue, this is what they can do, this is who they can contact. So there's never an issue where someone can say they didn't know what to do, because we have procedures in place that on a weekend, if someone doesn't know what to do, they can follow these procedures, contact these people, and they've always got the knowledge at their hands. So the quality management system is kind of like a giant toolbox. There's always information available to people, so there's all the guesswork's taking out of it, and people can't say they weren't sure what they had to do, because it's been laid out for them, and this is where they can find it. Communication discusses how the quality management system is communicated to the owners, how the quality management system's communicated to the operating authority, how it's communicated to our suppliers and service providers, and then how it's communicated to the public as well. So through reports to council, through training sessions to staff, through social media campaigns, letting the public know about that in regards to water systems. That's how and then the responsibility of the QMS representative to ensure that communication happens. Essential supplies and services. This element requires that a primary supplier is identified for essential supplies and services. So contractors that work on water main breaks, chemical suppliers for our chlorine, service providers for our analyzers or our SCADA systems. We have a primary supplier for those, and then we have a secondary supplier. So in the event primary is not available, we can go to that secondary provider, and then we advise them annually that the supplies and services they provide the county need to meet either industry standards or county standards, and that quality is essential for what they provide to the county. Review and provision of infrastructure. It's a 1-year review that is carried out between the Director of Environmental Services, the Environmental Services Manager, and then they reach out to roads and infrastructure. And it's kind of looking at all the essential infrastructure for the drinking water systems, current, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, just so we can always be planning that in 10 years, these pumps need to replace. In 5 years, these analyzers need to replace. This report comes to council once a year prior to budget deliberations, so you're always aware as the owners, staff's letting you know this is what needs to be done moving forward. Hand in hand with that is this element 15, infrastructure maintenance, rehabilitation, and renewal. Very similar is that, but we have to have a documented maintenance plan, rehabilitation plan, and renewal plan. So the county, same thing, looking current, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. This is going to go hands in hand with the asset management plan, as well as so staff is aware, like a work order system, that every day this needs to be done by the operators. Every week this needs to be done. Every month this needs to be done. So we're always looking at a maintenance system. So equipment, while it can always fail, we're doing our due diligence to ensure it's working properly always. But you can't plan for everything, but we have plans. If this pump fails, this is what we're going to do through the quality management standard. We're required to have a plan, a documented plan for our sampling, testing, and monitoring. So as mentioned, every day, month, year, every 5 years, we're doing sampling, testing, monitoring on the drinking water system. This element lays out the requirements, when it needs to be done, who needs to do it, when, and then who the information gets provided to. Element 17 is measurement, recording, equipment, calibration, and maintenance. So very similar to element 15, we need to have a procedure to ensure that all the regulatory equipment in the drinking water systems is being calibrated and maintained either by provincial requirements or by the instrument provider. So if the instrument provider says you must change this bearing every 6 years, we have a system in place to ensure we're meeting all those requirements. Element 18 is emergency management, which is obviously a very big one. So what this lays out is that we've got a water systems emergency management document for the water systems that lays out the biggest things that could happen. So staff have procedures to deal with those major emergency situations. The county has the pandemic plan that's referenced. So in the event of a pandemic, the county has the Emergency Operations Center, which is identified in here. So in the event of emergency situation, if the operators weren't be able to act, we've got plans to have the systems ran by other staff that are potentially qualified. So it's just a documented emergency plan specifically for the drinking water systems. So then we move into the check elements. So once per year, we need to do an internal audit of our quality management system. There's identified staff that has had Walker Team Clean Water Center training on carrying out these audits. They look at the 21 elements and all the water division's documentation, so our operational plans, our standard operating procedures. They interview staff to say, what do you know about this? Do you know how to operate this? How do you show that this instrument's been calibrated? Show me the records of that calibration. So we're always looking internally at our systems to ensure that we're doing what we say we do. And then the management review is a once a year meeting where the members of top management and other water staff meet. There's 18 specific requirements of that things we look at. We look at past inspection reports. We look at ministry inspections. We look at all the number of customer calls we get in a year and how they're dealt with. So these 18 things, we review them. If we identify something that needs to be happen because of that, that's considered an action item. We identify who's responsible for dealing with that action item, a specific date when it should be addressed, or if it can't be addressed, extend that. And then that report will come to council once a year later in the year. You'll get the minutes and the summary of that meeting, and you will get the minutes of what was discussed at that meeting. The final element being the biggest one is the continual improvement. So through audits or through inspections, we will get, through the ministry, they'll give us a non-compliance. If we don't comply to a requirement of a regulation, we need to come up with a plan to address that. So develop a procedure, provide training, maybe implement a new system. And through the quality management side, we'll get non-conformances. And non-conformances should never be considered to be a bad thing. It's a finding to make our systems stronger. So there's a major nonconformance and a minor nonconformance. A major would be a complete miss of an element. To date, the county hasn't had any major nonconformances. A minor nonconformance come periodically either through our audits or through a third-party audit. But like I said, don't consider those to be bad. We've identified a gap in our systems. We're going to make it better. And then there's opportunities for improvement as well, that if we identify something that we met the requirement, but we could do this better, you'll see opportunities for improvement as well. And then there is one more step, is that we look at not the like an opportunity for improvement as a finding, but we also look at, we're always looking to improve our procedures through this element. So this is our quality management system policy.
Excuse me, we have a question.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Councilor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Just before we get off that slide there, for number 7, risk assessment, you said it's reviewed every year, then 3 years it's completely redone?
Correct.
Interesting. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, it just takes complacency away from saying, oh, yes, but this hasn't changed, this hasn't changed, this doesn't change. In 3 years, staff could change, a different viewpoint could come in. You know what I mean? There's always a different way to look at it. So something, a risk that wasn't considered previously, or the ministry may out. So currently right now, no one ever considered cybersecurity, but now cybersecurity is being rolled out through the province as a requirement to determine what municipalities are going to do to ensure that your SCADA system, which is electronic, to make sure it doesn't get corrupted, to make sure your procedures and files don't get corrupted. Another big one was climate change. We need to consider climate change. So in 2009, when this was implemented, climate change wasn't on the risks. So there was a question about, monitoring well levels. We're seeing that potentially you go through 2 years of decreased groundwater levels. Some of these production wells that are at a shallower level, if we keep going through drought conditions, maybe those wells can't be used as much so by doing the 3-year start from scratch, new industry standards may come in, or just a new set of eyes may see something that someone else didn't see.
Very good. I like that concept. Good ideas for that.
Are there any other questions before we move on? Councillor Chambers, you're first, and Councillor Miller.
Through you, you elaborated a little bit on the, I think it's number 19 on the list, internal audits.
Yep.
And you said that your staff had, I forget the number,
Walkerton Clean Water Center. So they attended a 2-day training session put on through the Walkerton Clean Water session that kind of gives them an overview of what to look at through these audits.
Okay, and you said at least I understood to say that you had a checklist of a certain number of things that the staff goes over.
Yeah. Yeah, the 21, we try to look, we're not required to, but we try to look at each element and associated procedures to that element.
And once you go through that audit, then you make a report to council on the findings of that audit.
Correct. Yes.
That's what I understood you to say.
Yes. And then annually we have a desktop paper review by a third-party accreditation body. So we have a company that comes in, looks at our paperwork side, and then every 3 years they come in and do a re-accreditation audit. So an auditor comes on site, looks at our documentation, interviews staff, and then that determines if we're meeting the requirements of the standard, and they will re-accredit us every 3 years.
Okay, you're getting a little bit ahead of me here.
Sorry.
Because I'm not that up on this, but so once you do the checklist of the audit,
Yes.
and report to council, that
Yes.
comes to council in terms of a report.
Correct.
So my question is, there should be a list of things that council looks at in your report to make sure that you are doing things right, and that is what we're responsible for. So my second part of my question is, what are some of the things that council should look at in your report to make sure we're doing the due diligence to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do? In other words, I'll call it an external audit of an internal audit, because that's a responsibility that we have as council.
Right. So as council, in receiving the report, you should review the findings. If you have questions on the findings, please reach out to myself and I can provide you more information. There's nothing specifically in there that's going to impact council. This is an operating authority thing. We're keeping you aware of what's going on. If there was a finding in the audit that was a catastrophe, then there may be a request from council to provide direction.
And I would just comment that you may assume that we know
Right.
by reading the report that things are either good or bad, but I'm saying that I don't necessarily have the knowledge to digest the report to make a judgment on whether things are good or bad. And what I'm looking for is maybe a list of things, half a dozen things that I can look at in the report as a checklist of my own to make sure I understand and am seeing what needs to be done.
Just one.
Because the report, to be honest with you, they come and they're thick and they're long and they've got a lot of stuff on them that goes in here and out here, and I'm just nodding my head, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I'm going to say, anything you're going to find in that report is never a bad finding. It's not going to put the county in a position that we're in trouble. It's just going to make our quality management system better. So you're not going to see anything that's going to have to trigger you to say, "Ike's, we need to do this," because we're not in a non-compliance. We're just finding to ensure systems that we always stay in compliance. These are conformances, and that's not a bad finding ever in these reports. And Rob, go ahead.
I'm going to expand on that a little. So I've been in the water industry since before Walkerton, so things have evolved a lot over those years, and some of you have been on council all that time too, so you've seen sort of the evolution of what's happened over that time. And back to when some of the first reports came in under the new legislation, which was 459 back in 2001, then became Reg 170. I'm going to say most municipalities at the first of this were doing a lot more explaining of what was going on because everything was new, the standards had changed, not all the systems were up to the new standards yet, and there was a lot of explaining. And I can remember back in those days, you know, overseeing those annual reports, which were going to my council at the time, and spending hours on them. And I think we're very lucky now because as you look at our MOE reports that come in, you know, most of them, have you noticed lately, we're getting 100% on, which is very good. I keep telling everybody, don't expect to get 100% every time, though. Like when you don't get 100%, doesn't mean that things are falling to the wayside. It means, again, you got to do the plan, do check, and then improve on those things. We also then have, so that's actually an external audit too. The ministry inspections are an external audit. You get it reported on them, and then this auditor and the same thing. And I think the thing you've seen is that there's been very little in those external audits of any problem. I think you can take solace out of that. The internal audits, yeah, you got to trust your staff and what they're doing and how they're reporting to you. But there is the checks and balances there.
Councilor Chambers, you're okay with that? Councilor Miller, you're next, please.
Two questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Dave. Dave, number 13, essential suppliers and services. You mentioned we have a primary and then we have a secondary. Just in the last 2 or 3 years, have any of those suppliers or services gotten shorter in their distances?
No, they've historically remained fairly consistent. We have had the issue where a supplier went out of business or the name changed, but they've been very stable. You know, there's been a couple minor changes, but most of the equipment used by the operations group has remained the same. You know, they use quality materials, and we'll continue to use quality materials.
Okay, I was wondering if we shorten the supply lines. That's all. Second question. I don't see it in the rest of the presentation, so I'm going to ask if you could just, if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, could you just walk us through quickly? Could you talk about emergency management, like a boil water alert? Say we get an ice storm. Not that that happens very often around here, and the power goes out. Say in Mount Pleasant, and then the secondary generator, the backup generator doesn't kick on, so we don't have a period where there's no chloration. So we issue a boil water advisory. How is that communicated out? What's the steps? Like, I know we let the public health know.
Right. So public health, we would have to advise them that, you know, there was issues, and they would ask the county to issue a boil water. We would work with the county's communication group to get the message out to the public. Now, based on the size of the area, if it was the entire community or was it a small section of the community that needed to be identified, but we would use social media. And if it was the worst case scenario, door to door, staff would go door to door to warn the public. And then this is one thing that we've been working with to put together. We do have a boil water plan, but it could be made better. So we're continually to improve that document. But, you know, I mean, we've got a short working order, but while you can plan for events, until it truly happens, you're kind of, you know, you really don't know what you're dealing with. But we have avenues in place to get that message out, and using teams within the municipality to get that message out. You know, like, you know, at one time it would have been that you contacted the radio, but, you know, radio really isn't the effective tool anymore. So using the county social media is probably our best message tool to get the message out. And like I said, door to door, if we had to go door to door and it took time, we would pull staff in to go door to door. And then while water wasn't available, we've got plans where we've considered bringing like a water tanker, and we've got contacted water haulers whose tankers are dedicated for potable water that potentially could come in. We would allow residents to fill up jugs.
Just to follow up, that boil water plan, would that be under element 18?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, because we just went through with our emergency management plan with Kent Podriff last week, and but you know, we never talked about this at all. So I guess worst case scenario, it was really bad. Go door to door.
Correct. Yeah, we would do. You know, it's not laid out what you need to do. It's up to the municipality to come up with a plan, and that's one thing we're continually to improve is our boil water plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lee?
Yeah, just through Mr. Mayor to Councillor Miller's question, and you just touched on it, but depending on the scale of the event, it could require a partial activation of the Emergency Operations Center. And as we learned last week, the communications team is embedded right in as part of that unit, so that would be the link through Rob's team to the EOC to communications.
Right, and a lot of our standard operating procedures for a lot of the events, if it would be a catastrophe like that, there is a reference in the procedures that Rob would be contacted, and then the emergency group would be potentially brought in based on what the scenario was.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Stevenson before we move on? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, so as mentioned, we're required to have a quality management policy, kind of like the backbone of the quality management system. It shows that the county is committed to providing its consumers safe drinking water that meets all the requirements of all applicable legislation and regulations. We're committed to the implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the drinking water quality management standard, and the county shall require the principles of the quality management system in the operation, design, construction of the drinking water systems, and that it be followed. So, you know what I mean? If we're bringing on a new water tower, we look at all our documentation, so our operational plans, our SOPs, to make sure that staff have tools when this tank comes online, what needs to be done, when maintenance needs to be done, what pieces of equipment need to be checked. So we're always looking and using quality management systems when we're progressing through our water systems. It's posted at the Burford Amin building, various water facilities, and it's also on the county's website. So commitment and endorsement as measured is that we need owners' commitment and endorsement to the quality management system. The County of Brant has the mayor typically sign as the owner's representative, top management signs the document, and the QMS representative signs it as well to show their commitment. It ensures, top management ensures that the QMS is in place that meets the requirements of the D2E QMS, ensures the operating authority is aware of all applicable legislation and regulatory requirements. We do an effective job in communicating the QMS to staff, to the public, to the owners, and we provide resources needed to maintain and continually improve the quality management system. So you will see a report in the future with element 3 and requesting council endorse it through their signature on that document. And then that document, once signed, will be incorporated into the operational plan until the next term of council, and then we'll come forward at that time requesting the new council have this training and then endorse the plan. So I mentioned element 10, communication, communicating information to the owners, the public, and the operating authority so everyone knows what's going on. So historically, we used to send a quarterly compliance report. That report moving forward is going to come 3 times a year. You will see it January, that will cover the end of the previous year. You'll see it in April. Most of the major regulatory reporting to the Ministry of the Environment, Climate Change and Parks happens by the end of March. So you will see April, a summary of all the reporting the county did. You will see the internal audit report at that time will be included in that report. And any other regulatory or quality management information comes in that report 3 times a year. The element 14 report, review of provision of infrastructure, typically comes before budget. That's the review of all the drinking water components, looking ahead and forecasting to ensure when they need to replace so budgeting can happen appropriately. Any other budget recommendations will come through staff reports. The element 20 report, again, will come at the end of the year. Year in review, summary of the quality management system and regulatory instances through the previous year, well, through that current year. We usually run October to October. The Schedule 22 report that you will have seen and will approve tonight, it describes the rated capacity in the municipal drinking water license compared to what's truly going out in the system. The annual report is kind of like the sampling and chemistry side of the drinking water systems for the previous year. You're seeing that report again tonight. Every year we have a third-party hydrogeologist review the county's groundwater well information, water quality, well levels. They provide us a report on our aquifers every year. That report comes to council as an information report, and then we do submit part of that report to the Ministry of the Environment for the Paris well fields they want to see. They're specifically concerned with Gilbert Creek to ensure Gilbert Creek isn't impacted by water taking. So there's specific monitoring requirements, and we need to provide them information that the water taking isn't impacting that creek. You will receive the internal audit report as mentioned with those compliance reports, as well as you will receive as part of those compliance report the annual surveillance report of our quality management system by the third-party accreditation body, and then you will also receive the 3-year audit report that was just done this previous summer. We were just re-accredited, and you won't see another one until close to the end of your term. Whenever we're inspected by the Ministry of the Environment, that ministry inspection report is forwarded to council, and the scoring report to show the scoring we received on that inspection report. And as well, you will receive any other reports required throughout the year on the drinking water systems and the quality management system. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Any other questions before we move on?
Good afternoon. I'm Scott McDonald, Water or Environmental Services Superintendent. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our staffing. So currently the county employs 11 water operators, 10 operators and 1 lead hand. These operators have a broad range of skills, all from varying backgrounds, including even recently transfers from within different county departments. It's a kind of a common thing, and we like that. A large part of being comfortable in an operator role is being good with customer service. We deal with a large range of customer service concerns. We often deal with these in person, very often, and within the resident's home. All of our operators are very team-oriented folks, very cooperative amongst each other, as well as with our management team, and we all strive for the same goal, just like everybody here, safe and reliable drinking water for the residents of the county. As you noted on the slide, Dave and Mike have both, and Rob have both spoken with regards to Reg 128. That is a regulation that governs the certification of water operators and the systems and the training they are required to take. So our staff is, as mentioned previously, available 24/7. Go back up here. Per the regulation, the operating authority must assign an overall responsible operator. This operator has to have the same level or greater classification that the system they're operating is accredited. So currently this role is taken by myself, the superintendent, and Mike Biggin, the manager, and on occasion our lead hand, who isn't present, Jordan Corner, will take in our absence. We must be available 24/7, as mentioned, to provide operators with guidance and also to maintain reporting requirements if necessary to the Spills Action Center, the Ministry of Environment and of Conservation and Parks, as well as the health unit if there happened to be an adverse test result. Also, though, we have a stipulation where all operators who are qualified to do so could volunteer themselves to fill in as the overall responsible operator if we needed somebody to fill in for one of the 3 of us. They have to have the licensing that I mentioned previously, though, to do so. Keep changing the slides. Sorry. So apart from that, right below the ORO staffing designation, there is what's called an operator in charge. All drinking water systems that are operating must designate an operator in charge. Adjustments to any system must be made by or under the direction of an operator in charge. To qualify to be an operator in charge, the operator must at least hold a Class 1 operator certificate. This is a milestone for a new employee that we look forward to them getting. Then they're responsible for their own decision making. As far as hours go, for a regular work day, our operators work during regular business hours. Our business hours in the water division here are 7 a.m. to 3:30. Throughout the normal working hours, operators are normally taking care of maintenance, customer service activities, as well as performing all regulatory duties that are required. As mentioned, we are a 24/7 operation, so 2 operators are designated on call every week, along with the ORO. They are available 24/7, including weekends and holidays. 1 operator is on call in the Paris system, and then there's 1 operator on call for the other systems together. As you can imagine, Paris is a bit more demanding as far as calls and complexity. Typical calls they could receive are operational alarms from treatment plants, including security, infrastructure failure in the distribution system, like a water main break, and customer emergencies, like needs water off, meters leaking, practical stuff like that. All the certified water operators, including the lead hand, participate in this rotation. That's pretty much a broad overview of our staffing. Is there any questions? Yes, sir.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Scott. Earlier, no, it's not earlier this year, is it? No, late last year, earlier last year, we had a problem on Dumfries Street. We had a water main break.
Yes.
That's the one that I'm most familiar with. What's the process our residents should follow if they suspect a water main break?
If they suspect a water main break, we would have them call the county office number. That number, after hours, is directly routed to the fire dispatch. Fire dispatch will then call the operator on call. That operator will respond to the concern.
What would the typical response then be?
We would hope they would call them within 5 minutes. And if they need to attend, which is likely if that's the incident, they would be there as soon as possible. I would like to say within 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are you guys unionized?
The operators are, yes.
Are they deemed an essential service?
Technically, no.
So they could strike.
Yes.
That could be a problem. Okay, thank you.
Just to that note, myself, Mike in the back, and Alex are operators, so we can operate in that incident.
So if you need anything, let us know. Councillor Pierce, you're next.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thanks for the information. Just very quickly, when you talked about, to respond to, somebody's main is leaking or something like that. I know you don't know exactly, but roughly in a week, would you have like half a dozen of those? Would you
Water main breaks? Well,
No, not water main breaks.
okay.
Like people in their houses.
There's probably, we've had like, with the new homes in Paris, we've had a lot of people calling with pressure concerns. It turns out they're internal problems, so we try to weed those out before we send operators out.
Right.
It's not always possible because people are persistent. So we send an operator, and that's very good customer service. So we try to strive for that. But 2 or 3 times a week in Paris for sure. Alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to follow up, if I could, so just for everybody's sake, when it comes into the meter in your house, like up to that meter is county, and then from there is. So that's
No. So the county is responsible for the up to the property line, which is where the curb stop usually is. The curb stop is the small cast iron. We call it a box you'll see in your front yard, which contains a rod where we put a key down, turn the water off. That's where the county's responsibility stops. So if a household main, a water service is leaking past that point, it is the resident's responsibility.
Okay. So
Up into the water meter, just let me clarify, the water meter is the county's responsibility. It's that little portion within the house where the meter is. If it's leaking from a gasket, we will be more than happy to take care of that.
So I just got more because where I'm going with this is so I've got my let's say the meter's leaking and I'm going to replace it. So is there a charge to actually shut the water off as well?
Yes.
So it's a charge to shut the water off and a charge to fix the meter.
I don't believe there's no charge to fix the meter, but there will be a water off charge. However, if the meter is leaking, we will not charge for the water to be turned off because it's our issue to fix. Yeah. But if there was a private plumbing issue and they needed the water off, there's a fee for that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we just have one last section to get through here, and it's just about the water systems and the robustness of the water systems. Is the slide going to come back up? Oh, okay, there it is. Okay, I see. Yep. So I'll just get through this quickly, but so we have redundancy in our systems. That's one of the main things that in the water business that we we keep trying to get as redundancy on everything. So, for instance, on one of the big things that happened in the Walkerton incident was they didn't have redundancy of their chlorine pumps. So now in every system that we have, the main disinfection chlorine pumps are twinned. So they're, and I mean, separate supply, separate pump, separate lines, separate injection points. So if one completely gives up, it's no problem. We have the other one. Our SCADA system monitors that. It automatically switches over to the other one. We have spare pumps, which actually the ministry just started actually checking our parts and spare pumps. That's a new thing that they started a couple of years ago. I was kind of surprised when they asked, but we had all that. So we have brand new pumps in the box, ready to go. We have parts to fix the pumps that we have. We have parts to fix the chlorine lines, everything. So what happened in Walkerton where their pump gave up and they didn't have another one and they're waiting on parts or a new pump or something like that, that won't happen here. We have twin systems. We have everything. So, and our operators are skilled enough to repair that. The other thing we have is a design so demand will not exceed firm capacity. So an example of that is the high lift pumps at Mount Pleasant, for instance. If the computer system goes crazy for some reason and all the pumps turn on, it can't overpressure the system. You hear in the industry, you hear that, they say, this pump came on and started blowing mains out of the ground and all that. We can't actually physically do that. The pumps aren't capable of that. They're only capable of, even if they all turn on at once, they're only capable of delivering, say, 60 psi, which is what the system wants. And then on top of that, we have a relief valve. So for some reason, they do get above that. We have a relief valve that's sitting there waiting, watching the pressure nonstop that will open and just circulate the water through. So we try and do a lot of that stuff so that if there is any problems, we can mitigate the problem before they even start. And then again, standby power on all critical facilities. These generators can run, they run everything, lights, pumps, all our analyzers. So when we get there after a power outage, so it'll come over our phone. Oh, there's a power outage at the Gilbert station. We respond, generator's running. Other than the sound of the generator, everything looks perfectly normal in the plant. It switches over automatically. The guys go in, they check the generator, make sure that the generator is working right. There's not a big leak or something like that. And then they check on it regularly after that. We have contractors that come in and do the maintenance on the generators as well. So let me just see here. So the other thing is the rigorous monitoring of operations. So again, I mentioned before about the SCADA system, the historian that records data every minute. We use this information daily to ensure we're operating within regulatory requirements, as does the OIC. This info is also given to the Ministry of Environment so that they can conduct their inspections. Again, SCADA provides the early warning systems that I talked about earlier. All sites are attended by the operators daily, so every site that we have is attended. And then the manager, myself, and Superintendent Scott, we attend the sites weekly. So we plan for infrastructure upgrades and maintenance. We plan with infrastructure services with Mark, and the financial plan provides the funding through the water rates for most of these projects. For purchasing, we get stuff. We try and get stuff at the lowest possible cost that we can, but we have certain requirements that we also look at. So longevity, availability of parts. Frequency and ease of maintenance, cost of the failure. We have to, in the water business, I always tell everybody, you have to look at how long do you want it to last. A lot of our water mains, when we put them in the ground, what do we want them to last? 30, 60, 90 years? usually it's 90 years we expect our water mains to last. So we have to put quality parts in the ground that are going to last, so we don't go around replacing all the valves, for instance, that have failed. The water main might be good for 90 years, but if the valves are only good for 30, that's not going to be very helpful. So we try and put quality parts in the ground, and there are a lot of quality parts out there, so generally we get a very competitive price. So regulatory compliance. The first thing with regulatory compliance is you have to understand the intention of the regulations. So when there is a regulation, it's important to understand why it's there and why you need to, why the points are where they are. For instance, if the minimum chlorine residual out of a water plant is 0.05, well, why is it 0.05? Anything over 0 is technically disinfected water, but it's 0.05 because the instruments we use have a 0.05 error factor. So that's just one reason. So you have to understand why things are the way they are, and the Ministry of Environment is a great tool for that. We call them often and ask their opinion on something, or why is this like this, and can you help me understand? And they're very good at helping us understand those questions. And our regular correspondence with the ministry inspectors, I've had them say many times to me about our staff and myself that they often say, thank you for your honesty, thank you for being open about this and stuff like that. When we have a problem, when we have a regulatory problem, I'm on the phone to them right away, and they pick up, lucky enough, and we talk about it. And I say, hey, I'm not sure if this is a regulatory issue. Can you help me with this? Because sometimes it is in a bit of a gray area, for instance. And so I just ask them straight up, and they'll say, geez, I don't know the answer to that question. I've never dealt with that. But let me ask the group, and they'll get back to me. 10 minutes later, they're back to me and say, you know what, that doesn't need to be reported because of this, or, we should report that just as an abundance of caution. We'll report that. So that's the kind of relationship we have with the ministry. And the head of the ministry, Aziz, Dave talks to him from time to time, as do I, and again, a wealth of information and very reasonable individuals. The other thing is, all members of the water division strive for regulatory compliance, from the water operators, lead hand, water quality staff, compliance staff, which is Dave, superintendent, manager, director, and Rob. It's really nice to work with people that have a good knowledge of the water regulations and how they apply. Like Rob has all kinds of experience with that stuff. So, when I call him with an issue, I'm not talking to someone that doesn't have any experience. He's got a wealth of experience and often can give me a hand. So the risk assessment and mitigation of risks. So again, Dave talked about elements 7 and 8, and then we have the emergency plan. All are reviewed regularly. Worst case scenarios thought out and planned for. And actually, my example was what you brought up about what if the generator doesn't start, right? We have a backup, but then what if that backup fails? So we've actually gone through that scenario in some of our mock scenarios and dealt with that. O&M manuals and standard operating procedures, they all have the same layout and sections, and they're a good point of reference for infrequent situations and procedures that everybody needs help with. So staffing, all staff recognize that they're accountable and acknowledge responsibility for the health and safety of the community's water from source to tap. Staff respond to issues 24/7, as Scott was saying. And just to give you a bit more detail on that, so our operators, they're obviously our frontline staff. They're on call every 3 to 5 weeks for 7 days at a time. The OROs, myself and Scott, are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on a 2-week on, 2-week off rotation. Even the office staff in the water division who work 8:30 to 4:30. I've called Dave on the weekend before at night, asking his opinion or for some help on a certain thing, and he's more than willing to pick up the phone and give us a hand. So it's really good. And the leadership of the water department. The nice part at the county is we've all been here for many years. All the water guys that are here, and we've all worked our way up the ladder from operators all the way up to where we are now. And so the understanding is there. It's not like someone has never been out in the field or anything like that. We know what happens out in the field, and we know what happens now in the office environment. And so it makes for a really good it makes for a really good understanding. The relationship with the vendors and the service providers. So we have many contractors we've worked with for years. They provide us great service. They need to be available to us often 24/7. Certain contractors, anyway, like SCADA, excavating contractors, even our water main part suppliers. And they've given us 24/7 numbers to call. So if we ever need anything, it's not an issue. Even with our part suppliers, we've called them at 3 o'clock in the morning. They've opened up for us to give us a part. They'll say, yeah, we're going to go over there right now. It'll be sitting outside the gate for you. And we'll go pick it up and deliver it to site if for some reason we don't have anything. And these numbers that they give us are often not just answering service numbers. It's the owner, it's the manager. They give us their numbers so we can call their cell number personally. We don't abuse it, but they like working with us because of the knowledge of our staff. The operators and the leadership staff are all knowledgeable, and they comment on that often about how the operators are so knowledgeable here compared to other municipalities they work with. And other municipalities, they don't get that kind of service. Like we hear sometimes that they say, oh, we'd never give our number out like this to other places, so please keep it private or something like that to yourselves. But they provide that service to us. And then lastly, strong support by senior staff and council. It's easy for staff to do the right thing if they know they have the support from the top, and we really do appreciate it. And staff, senior staff always provide recognition and appreciation for things well done, so we appreciate that as well. Any questions?
Thank you. Before we move on to the municipal drains, is there any questions for the water department? Councillor Coleman?
Maybe just kind of a simple question. Could you explain the difference between our water and the city's water and how the chlorination works?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So all we do here is, as I said, our source water is very clean. So we pump it out of the ground. For instance, let's take Mount Pleasant, for example. For Mount Pleasant, we pump it out of the ground. We add chlorine to it. It goes in the reservoir. It mixes and has some time with the chlorine in there, and we send it to town. That's the whole treatment process. We remove iron and manganese in Mount Pleasant, but again, it's a simple process with basically just sand filter. So, and airports the same way. In the city, they obviously have a much more complicated treatment process to make river water into drinkable water, and then they use chloramination as well. So chloramination is basically gas and ammonia added to the water, and they pump it out at a much higher rate of chlorine than we do. So our chlorine goes out at, say, roughly 1.0. Theirs goes out at above 2.20 often. So that's why people maybe report smells of different smells, different tastes in the city water, because it goes through much different treatment process than ours. So ours is really simple and not much different than a rural well, for instance.
Any other comments? Well, thank you. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to thank Rob and Greg for everything you did last night and this morning with the storm. You did a great job. I know that people all over the county are talking about how great and how fast you work getting it done. So I know it's not about water, it's about snow, but I saw you both in the same room, so thought I'd take the opportunity to thank you. And to do with water, you know, when I first became the mayor, Michael Bradley took me around and showed me all the different, I met all of you people, and Michael showed me the process and all the things. And I liken it to the tagline of the Lung Association when it says, if you can't breathe, nothing else matters. And as the mayor, all day long, I hear about traffic jams and traffic circles and crosswalks and all kinds of things all day long, and they're all very important and they're all very serious. But at the end of the day, if you can't breathe, it doesn't matter, and nothing else matters. And that's how I feel about the water department. Tell Alex whatever he needs, he's got. He's on my Christmas card list. He knows that. And now that I know that you're part of a union, you can all be on my Christmas card list. But thank you for everything you do, because as you know, council and the mayor are chosen from the public. We all come from different places and know different things. So I don't ever pretend that I know anything about water, but I am so impressed by what you know. And thank you for doing such a good job, because water is the only piece of the county that's ever kept me up at night. Because I know how serious it is, and I know what it did to Walkerton, and I know how quick it could happen here. So thank you for all you do. With that, I don't think we're taking a break, are we, Rob? We're gonna go right to number 2.
We can go into number 2, or we could take 5 minutes if people want to do it. I think that I expected the water part to be about this long, so I think we're more or less on schedule for three hours and a bit. So why don't we take a 5-minute break now and then get on with number 2?
We'll have a 5-minute recess.
Thanks, guys.
We're back. Okay, Mr. Walton, if you'd like to continue, please, to number 2, municipal drains on our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, we're going to talk about municipal drains now. Chip paste, different type of water, important for different reasons. Mostly today, Greg Demers and Shannon Tweedle are going to do the presentation. I just want to bring a bit of historical context first. So, the Drainage Act has been around since something like 1890 in Ontario in different forms. And there are definitely drains out there in this area which date back to that time. And I used to be a consultant. I used to write drain reports under the Drainage Act. And F.J. Ure, PNG out of Woodstock, Ontario, was doing drains back in, I've seen reports of his in the 1890 and 1892 range. And my guess is that he probably worked in Burford Township too, would be the guess. I haven't seen any of his actual reports, but for sure in Oxford County, he did a ton of them back in that era. So some of these drains, their original reports, a lot of them have been redone since then, but a lot of them would have dated back to that date. And the construction and maintenance of those drains has been going on for that period of time. Now, we're soon going to bring up
I'm sorry, Councillor Bell.
That's a very fundamental question. I know nothing about municipal drains. So can you just, before you get into the subject matter, just say what municipal drains do and what purpose they serve?
Okay, so the Drainage Act is one of the registered statutes of Ontario, and it lays out a process as to how people can get a drainage problem addressed. So it starts by a petition of owners or a petition of the municipality to start a drain. And Shannon and Greg are going to go into that a little more detail, but it starts with that. The council then gets involved to accept the petition and start the process to go through, and they're going to go through that in quite a bit of detail in this case. But it actually, mostly the Drainage Act process has been used for rural and mostly agricultural drainage issues, but not specifically. So I did one drain report in the county of Brant, and it actually was a petition for the town of Paris. I stood in this very spot to present this in and around 1990 for the Northwest Drain, which is the subdivision which is just north of the fairgrounds there. And it outlets to the west into an old gravel pit. And then there's a drain that goes down into the creek to the west of there. And that was petitioned for by the developer of that subdivision because that was before amalgamation. And the boundary of Paris was right there. So the outlet of it was into South Dumfries. There's quite a bit of controversy over that drain. And the reeve of South Dumfries at the time was a fellow most people know, Ron Eddy, who put on quite a show here one night at council in Paris. So anybody or group of owners actually can petition for a drainage group. It doesn't have to be agricultural. Typically, though, urban drainage problems are dealt with in different ways through storm sewers and approval through the Ministry of Environment and the like. So most of these are rural. Some of them are tile, some of them are ditches. Some of them are drains which serve hamlets. We'll soon be getting a report coming back in on the Bennett Drain, which is an agricultural drain but goes right through the middle of Harley. So it has both components of residential and agricultural drainage.
But the fundamental purpose is to better groom the land to make it more useful in agricultural purposes. Is that the simple answer?
Yes, and to deal with what it really deals with is people on their own property can deal with drainage on their own property, but you can't deal with the outlet because you're outletting somewhere else. And you have to have a sufficient outlet for that. So that it needs to be into a natural water course or another legal drain which is designed to take the water. So that's what the Drainage Act really deals with, the outlet part of it, more than the farmers themselves can tile their own fields. But when they get to the spot where they've got outlet onto somebody else's property, you need an outlet. And this Drainage Act provides that outlet, and it's been providing it since 1890. It's really interesting when you look at those old reports, and you look at the petition for it, it'll often say there, we as a group of owners pray that the council will address this matter and provide us drainage. It'll say that right in the petition, in those old petitions. That was the wording of it. We pray that you will help us out, because they needed help. They wanted to improve their agricultural output, and they needed to drain some area which didn't drain naturally. And they're installing tile drainage back then. It wasn't all the systematic tile drainage we have now, but the odd random tile to improve things. And it was all dug in by hand or by horses pulling spades.
So is it fair to say that all the fundamental drainage is done now, and we're in the process of maintaining drains that have been recognised over the last many hundreds of years?
Well, I'd say that statement's partly true, not 100% though. A lot of it is either redoing or improving drains, which we already have, but there is the odd new branch which is brought up, or areas where they're doing something different and they want an entirely new drain. It both can happen, but I'd say mostly now we're dealing with areas where there was a drain and we're improving it, so that, Shannon and Greg are going to section 78, what that is, section 76, all of these other things. So, yeah. So I think that's all I've got to say. I'm going to bring Greg up and Shannon. They'll tell you the real scoop.
Good afternoon. My name's Greg Demers. I'm the Director of Roads and Fleet for the County of Brant. Today we have Shannon with us. And Shannon's going to jump into the meat of the presentation today. But before we get into that, I'd just like to talk a little bit about where we are, where I'd like to see us go, and a little bit about my background in drains. So when the former director, Mike Tout, retired in late 2019, I was fortunate enough to take Mike's position at that time. And in my area of expertise was definitely road maintenance and process management. I had very little background in drainage, and through my works with Shannon, she's helped bring me up to speed. So in July 2021, RJ Burnside Associates was approved through a bylaw to provide drainage services to the County of Brant. And it was in August 2021 that I was actually introduced to Shannon Tweedle. We have been working closely since that time with a common goal of educating residents and staff on municipal drains. Through Shannon's dedication, we've been able to address many outstanding concerns from residents. And examples of this could be taking care of small repairs, all the way up to more expensive future planning for reconstruction of entire drains that have reached the end of their life cycle. One of the ideas that I had proposed to Shannon when we first met was a proactive approach to the municipal drain system. A municipal drain is actually infrastructure. So I was looking at it like all the other infrastructure under roads at the time that we were maintaining. So we need to have a plan. So Shannon returned a few months later and with a plan that spanned from 2021 all the way out to 2027 for all the open drains that we have within the municipality. This schedule incorporated inspections and subsequent maintenance work being completed by as early as fall 2027 if things go well. Shannon works with many departments and individuals within the county and has shown great patience and understanding as some of these processes are new for staff. Shannon makes time for the residents, and this has led to some very positive feedback, which I know has been relayed to councillors, especially over in the Burford-Harley area. Shannon is in constant communication, and her enthusiasm has been great benefit to the County of Brant and myself as we deal with the residents. And with that, thank you, Shannon. I'll let you introduce yourself and proceed with the presentation.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm Shannon Tweedle, and I act as the drainage superintendent for Brant County. One thing I was taught a few years ago when I first started in drainage, back when I worked at the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, is that a drainage works can be constructed by any means, including the improving of a natural water course, and includes any works necessary to regulate the water table or water level within or on any lands, or to regulate the level of waters of a drain, reservoir, lake, or pond, and includes a dam, embankment, wall, protective works, or any combination thereof. So that definition is pretty wide. It spans a lot of things. It comes right out of the Drainage Act. So this is my little Drainage Act handbook with a bunch of notes down the side. So it's my little cheat sheet. That definition under the Act gives us a lot of ability to solve drainage problems within agricultural landscapes and rural urban areas too. Anyways, a couple of the sections in the Act that you'll see a lot coming before you will be new drains. So that would be a petition filed by a landowner, could be a road authority as well, or the minister of OMAFRA. And that's a Section 4 petition, which is the first thing I'll talk about. Another section that you'll commonly see too is Section 78 of the Drainage Act, which is an improvement to an existing municipal drain. So for it to be a municipal drain, it must have an engineer's report. It must have plans, profiles, and drawings. There are other things it must have as the Drainage Act will state. And it has to have third reading of bylaw as well. So if it doesn't have a bylaw, if it doesn't have plans and profiles, if it doesn't have a report, it can't be a municipal drain. Another section you'll see is a Section 76. That's an update to an existing municipal drainage assessment schedule. So you'll have maybe infrastructure that is in good working condition, just needs to be maintained. But it was written so long ago and there have been so many changes that now the assessment schedule is either unfair, unusable, or it doesn't make sense for the land practices today in that watershed. And the last one you'll see quite a bit is Section 74, and that's just general maintenance of these existing systems. So the first is the process that results in a new municipal drain, which is the Section 4 petition. We'll have two of those, likely two of them, coming to council next month, so you'll get to see that. So all new drains have to be initiated by a petition, which activates the Drainage Act process. The petition form, it's a legal document prescribed by regulations. It's found on the OMAFRA website, and anytime someone is looking for them, I've got extra copies on hand and I hand them out. A lot of times, these petitions are thought about quite often by residents or the roads department, and they're sat on a little bit. So, for example, we have one coming to council next month, and I had first talked to this gentleman about the petition process and how he could solve his drainage problems under the Drainage Act in December of 2021. So he took quite a bit of time to think about it, filled it out, and brought it into Alicia so she could receive that petition. So signatories to the petition become financially responsible as soon as they sign that petition. If the petition goes forward, council has to appoint an engineer. The engineer will go through a process. As soon as those costs are incurred, if people remove their name from the petition and decide they don't want to do this anymore, they are now financially responsible for any costs incurred to date. That does not include drainage superintendent costs. My costs or costs to employ a drainage superintendent are taken out of the general tax fund. There's a 50% grant available by OMAFRA for drainage superintendent fees. So the use of the Drainage Act is not restricted to agricultural areas, as we've all mentioned. It can be used in many different areas. So the next steps, once a petition has been brought to council, council has to consider this petition. You can reject a petition, but you have to have a valid reason. You don't decide whether or not this petition is valid. That is up to the engineer that is appointed. So there aren't a whole lot of valid reasons to reject a petition. If it is clearly not needed, and that would be a recommendation of staff or the drainage superintendent, you could reject that. But many times, as I said before, people think about this for quite a long time and they sign it because they have no other option. Council decision and copy of petition. So that's following the consideration. The petition is accepted by council. The decision must be circulated to the petitioner, the local conservation authority, and the band council of any reserve, any other municipality that's affected, or Ontario Parks. We also recommend sending the notice to MNRF, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, sometimes MECP if you know there's going to be species at risk, or PSWs that are concerns, as well as Fisheries and Oceans Canada. So there's a 30-day period in which you have to wait to have any comments back from the Conservation Authority. Once you have that notice back and maybe that 30-day period has expired and no one has brought any concerns to the table, council can appoint an independent engineer. So the engineer must be fair and impartial. That is a section in the act, so they have to remain impartial throughout this whole process. And they represent the community of owners. The appointment has to be by bylaw or resolution as per section 8 of the Drainage Act. So any appointed engineer by bylaw or resolution has right of entry onto private property. Most of these drains are through private property. A lot of them do cross road corridors, under utilities or through utilities, under railways, but most of the watershed will be on private property. And it's very important that the engineer and the people who work for the engineer have the ability to go onto private property to do any site reconnaissance they need to do, site investigations and survey. There is a guide for engineers working under the Drainage Act. It was publication 852, just released a couple of years ago. And every practicing engineer in Ontario has a copy of this, whether it's hard copy or digital. At the point of the appointment of the engineer, council can request a preliminary report. So that's a report done by an engineer that pairs back a little bit of information that you would find in a final report. It'll give you a general cost estimate and a general design. Preliminary reports are requested in cases where you might think that the cost benefit is out of whack. So if a landowner really needs this drain completed, but you find out it's way too expensive, no one will pay for it. Anyways, no one wants to support the process. A preliminary report will cut back on your costs to date because the engineer doesn't do a full survey and submit full sets of drawings and cost estimates. So when we finalize the report, there's a process to go through before the engineer can submit their report to council. Generally, most engineers will have what's called an information meeting. Prior to this information meeting, they've had an on-site meeting, which is mandatory under the Drainage Act, and they call together landowners within the area requiring drainage or the area that will be most affected by the drain. So people along the outer edge of the watershed may not be invited to the on-site meeting, but this information meeting allows everyone to gather. So they invite everyone who's assessed into the report, and they host the information meeting to discuss the information in the draft report, as well as address any outstanding issues before finalizing the report. They'll present the drawings, the design, the assessments to individual landowners, the overall cost estimate, and any particular issues that have come up in that specific drainage report. Once the report's been finalized and filed, council will be notified of the filing of the report. In section 39 of the Drainage Act, the report must be filed within 1 year of the appointment, or it can be extended by council resolution. Most reports are not filed within 1 year, and most councils do not pass resolutions to extend the 1 year deadline. What's happened over the past few years, 10 years or so, is regulatory agencies have become more involved in the process, and they take quite a while to review information and go back and forth with the engineer to come up with a design that they will approve or permit. Because one thing engineers must have are all their regulatory approvals and permits in order to construct the drain, and in order for OMAFRA to allow it to be eligible for the grant. So it's up to council whether or not they want to extend these projects by resolution or if they just let it go. If we see this becoming an issue in the future, we can certainly sit down once a year or 10 months has passed to determine whether or not we need to pass a resolution to extend that report. So a notice of meeting to consider the report is section 41 of the Act. A copy of the report and notice must be sent to all involved property owners, other affected municipalities, band councils, if any, and that's if the watershed is within another band council. Any conservation authorities, the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources, and Forestry if they're affected, road authorities, public utilities, railways, and one must be sent to OMAFRA as well. So there's a meeting to consider the report after the report's been filed by the engineer. All owners in the watershed are invited to the meeting. The meeting is chaired by the head of council, and the engineer gives an overview of the project. The role of the owners within the area requiring drainage, or ARD, is to add or withdraw names from the petition at this meeting. They can do it in advance, but it's not fully official until it's done at the meeting to consider the report. If the petition is no longer valid, the original petitioners must pay those costs incurred to date. The role of council at this meeting to consider the report is to decide whether to proceed. If not proceeding with the project and it's council's decision, the petitioners can appeal. They can take this to the next level of the appeal bodies and appeal council's decision. If council decides not to move forward on a Section 4 report, they are left with the costs incurred to date. So with a new drain, there is no assessment schedule. There is no municipal drain. So there's no way to recover any costs. If proceeding, council gives 2 readings of a bylaw to provisionally adopt this report. There is an appeal process for all assessed lands and roads within drainage reports. So the first appeal body is called the Court of Revision. It's appointed by the municipality and members must be eligible to be elected to council. It hears the appeals on assessments only, so they only deal with the costs or the assessments of lands and roads within the watershed. The next step would be the tribunal. So that's a provincial appointment. There's a provincial tribunal body, so it's not members of council. They're appointed by OMAFRA. They hear appeals from the decision of the Court of Revision and any technical appeals having to do with the report. All decisions are posted on the CAMLE website, and that's just a little link to the website there.
I think there's a couple of questions. Can we just take those? Councillor Howes, you had one first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, Shannon just answered. I was going to ask about the appeal bodies, and so you gave me that answer. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. I think this is going to happen. We were going to do questions at the end, but I think it's better to do them while they're fresh. Councillor Pierce and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Shannon. First of all, thanks for this. The question I have is when you talk about the appointment of the engineer has the right to enter on private property, is it safe to say that the properties that that engineer would be going on to would be part of those names that are signed on that petition? So it wouldn't really be some unknown property really that we're going on to. All the property owners would understand that this person is coming on. It's just a legal thing that says, hey, they can't be there.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Not necessarily, because if someone is signing a petition, they need an outlet. So it is the engineer's responsibility to take that drain to a sufficient outlet, which means they may have to cross many properties to get to one. And it may be that this property owner had tried to reason with their neighbors in the past to put in a drain that they could just do outside of the Drainage Act, and they didn't want any part in it. So they may be opposed to being part of this project. But now that the process has started, if the engineer is appointed by bylaw or resolution, they now have that authority to enter in onto those lands of the owner who perhaps didn't want to be part of this, so that they can construct this drain and survey it and get all the information they need to come up with a fair and equitable design.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Shannon. A conceptual question. Is a municipal drain in property terms the same as a municipal road? Who owns the municipal drain?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The county, municipality, or township that has the drain within their borders is legally responsible for managing it under the Drainage Act, but they don't own it. The people within the watershed own that system. The people who have the drain on their property have ownership within that system because they pay into it to have it constructed and they pay into it to have it maintained. So the county, the drainage superintendent, municipality, they are the ones who ensure that maintenance is completed on this drain in a timely manner so that it can function as designed in that report, but the county does not own the infrastructure.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
That's a very interesting point that you bring up, and actually through asset management, there's been a lot of debate about this as to where municipal drains actually fit into asset management, and I think that there's actually two different streams of thought on that. One would be the answer that Shannon just gave here. I think there's others that would say the municipality actually does own the actual infrastructure there and has to maintain it, although they do not own any of the land. So on a municipal drain is really interesting. There's a right of way which is carved out for that, which talks how you can construct that drain and how you can maintain it, and the fact that you can access it as necessary in the future to do that. And then there's the pipes or the ditch or whatever that's there, other structures on the drain, culverts for crossing and the like. So I think there's a debate about that. Clearly, the municipality does not own the land or the right of way, though, except on the roads part of it. So I'm not sure there's a clear answer to that.
It's an interesting question. Thank you. One more question for me, Mr. Mayor. So if somebody who owns a bit of that drain decides he doesn't want to have any improvements done to it, does he have to just live with the fact that improvements will be done if the majority of people want it?
To you, Mr. Chair. If it's an improvement to the system, they have every appeal right as any other person assessed into the watershed. Through the reporting process, the on-site meeting, information meeting, and any individual site meetings with the engineer, they can express their concerns and why they don't want it or what they would rather see. And if they still feel they haven't been heard by the engineer, the appeal system, the appeal process is what they can go through to ensure that their opinion is heard and considered. So the tribunal would be the place where they could appeal any technical issues with the report. Not wanting a drain on your property is not generally a good enough reason for an appeal body to say, okay, we won't do it then.
So the natural conclusion of that is then they have to pay if they lose their appeal. They just have to cough up.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Chambers?
Two things. First of all, if you could just explain what an assessment schedule is, that may help with Councillor Bell's question. And secondly, just by way of comment, there used to be a flow chart at the Burford office wall that really explained the process in terms of a flow chart, which is very, very clear and a lot easier to understand than the point. So I'm wondering if perhaps a copy of that flow chart may be provided to members of council, not the one on the wall, but a facsimile of that. And thirdly, there's a perception that the drain is all that there is, but it's the area being drained that is the important part. And that's why I'd like you to just explain an assessment schedule as it applies to a municipal drain.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'll answer questions 1 and 3, and Greg will take over question 2. So an assessment schedule in a report is completed by an engineer to determine who pays what portion of the cost of the construction of the project, as well as any future maintenance of the project. So whether it's an open drainage system like a water course or a ditch, or if it's a closed system, which is what they call a tile, generally concrete pipe in the ground, could also be a corrugated steel pipe or HDP, other materials. So the assessment schedule, under a few different sections of the Act, the engineer has the ability to assess out costs based on benefit. So how much the drain benefits your property by having it there. Is it draining the land? Is it now allowing you to keep the water underground instead of over top? How much does it improve your farmable area? And then outlet. So outlet will apply to those people that may not necessarily have the drain on their property, but they're within a watershed. So a good way of looking at a watershed is like a wide saucer. The top end or the top edge of the saucer will be your watershed. If water falls on the inside of the saucer, it'll run down into your drain. If it falls on the other side of the saucer, it's no longer in the watershed. So anyone who is within the watershed is assessed into these projects, and they have right of appeal under these three bodies as well. So if they feel they've been assessed too high or too low, they have the ability to appeal that. The assessment schedule is what is talked about at the information meeting. After the engineer goes through what the design of the project is, he'll give a total cost estimate, and he will explain his rationale for how much each property should have to pay. Outlet is based on your distance away from the drain, your property size, your property use, so whether it's a parking lot where water will just run off immediately, or is it a wetland where it's going to stay there for a little while? And also the length of the drain your property uses. So are you at the very outer edge of the watershed and your water is going to use most of that drain, or are you closer to the bottom end and your water's not really using too much of it? So that's the assessment schedule. And question 3 was talking about the other people involved. So as it was pointed out earlier, the people along the course of the drain are involved, as well as other lands and roads and utilities within that watershed.
And then to go to question 2, through communication with Shannon, we realized with the Court of Revision and some of the newer members on council, and then a lot of work being done now is going to generate a lot of questions. So Shannon and I are actually putting together a package right now for a Friday file that will be given to all the councilors so that they have these cheat sheets or these flow charts that's already in discussion, and it's going to happen very quickly. Yes. So that'll come. And then further into the presentation, tying back to what Shannon was just talking about, we have a map in there that we've created in-house with Shannon's assistance that's going to show catchment areas for the drains, and it shows where our drains are located in the community and where work's been done and where work is scheduled to be done. I thought that would be a great visual cue for everyone. So when we get to that that map, I'll be smiling because it's a good one. So continue on.
All right. Any other questions?
I think that's the end of the questions, isn't it? Yep. Continue, please. Thank you.
The final appeal body is the drainage referee, and that is a legal proceeding. It can take quite a while to get through the referee. It is a provincial appointment. I believe we have 2 referees right now in Ontario, and they see a number of cases every year. And decisions for those are also posted on Canley. At the drainage referee, most municipalities and engineers will have legal representation, and it's encouraged that landowners do the same, although they don't have to if they choose not to. So that is the Section 4 petition for a brand new drain. Section 78 roughly follows the same set of steps. The only difference is there is no petition required because the area requiring drainage has been determined by a previous petition that made that drain into a municipal drain. So Section 78 picks up just after the petition process in the Drainage Act and follows the same thing. So there's the appointment by council of an engineer. There's an on-site meeting, surveying, and most of the time that information meeting that's not required under the act, but very much encouraged. And then the filing of the report, the meeting to consider, the Court of Revision. The only 2 appeal bodies that aren't necessarily required are I'll just go back one slide, the tribunal and the drainage referee. Those are only required steps under the Drainage Act if there are appeals. The Court of Revision must be held even if there are no written appeals, in case someone shows up late and decides they want to provide a verbal appeal. And then it's up to council to decide whether to go through with whether to hear verbal appeals. Section 74 deals with the management of municipal drains. So that is what I spend a lot of my time doing right now. Once constructed, drains become part of a municipality's infrastructure and responsibility to manage. So council is responsible for managing the system, including maintenance and repair, improvements, assessment schedule updates, managing connections, enforcement, and abandonment. It's council who directs the drainage superintendent. Most of my duties I don't need council direction for, but there are some that council must direct me to do. Maintenance and repair under section 74 is a mandatory responsibility of the municipality, township, or county in which the drain is located. There's possible liability for damages if work is not performed. So if we receive a request from a landowner to maintain a drain and we ignore it, or we decide it doesn't need to be done for whatever reason, we don't think it's in the budget, then we then become liable if there are damages to those properties. A new engineer's report is not required. Any maintenance and repair of existing systems follows the most current drainage report at that time, including specifications, drawings, and assessment schedule for future maintenance. The repair work must follow the standards in the existing report and bylaw. Any costs that we incur for any maintenance repairs, and those are construction costs, not drainage superintendent time costs, are assessed proportionally based on the assessment schedule in the existing report or bylaw. So some of the older reports only have one assessment schedule, and that's the assessment schedule for construction, but they do have a maintenance clause. The maintenance clause will tell you how to use that schedule for future maintenance. We prorate based on those schedules any costs incurred to maintain a drainage system. Most of the new reports these days will come with two assessment schedules, one for the initial construction of the drain or the improvement to the drain, as well as one for maintenance. And that one is generally expressed in a percentage. So when talking to landowners, you can easily look at this assessment schedule and say, your property is mostly responsible for X percentage of any future maintenance costs of this system. Improvements are those section 78, so that's requested by a property owner. Council can also initiate it. It can be the drainage superintendent recommending or staff recommending to council that improvements to an existing system are needed. A drain improvement is changing the communally accepted standards of the drainage system. So we are now changing that existing report, design, drawings, and assessment schedules. The same process as the construction of a new drain, but without the petition, something we just talked about. Typically, improvement examples will include drain relocations, an enclosure if someone has an open drain on their system and they prefer to have a tile so they can farm over top. That's an example of an enclosure. Or increasing the size of a pipe drain. Standards have changed throughout time, obviously. And back in the 60s, a lot of drains were sized to a certain drainage coefficient. A drainage coefficient is the amount of water in inches that a drain can take away in a watershed over a 24-hour period of time. So back in the 60s, it was typical to see a 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch drainage coefficient used as a standard for design. Today, the accepted standard by OMAFRA to pay grant upon is 1.5 inch design coefficient. That's not to say you can't size it for a larger coefficient or a design storm standard even. OMAFRA will only pay for the 1.5 inch design.
Councillor Pierce.
So just on that point, would the one have to be then consistent across the board regardless of the size of the drain, or is it dependent on the size of the drain, how big it has to be? Does that make sense?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I understand. The size of tile varies as you go down the system because there will be more inlet points, but that design standard will be the same. So you won't have a consistent pipe size along a 2-kilometer drain. It will be smaller at the top end and get larger as you get further downstream.
Is there a maximum length that we like to make these drains, or is that governed as well, or just if we've got the way and it's just going to keep on going?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The length of drain is determined by that sufficient outlet. So if the engineer only has to take the drain 100 meters downstream to get to that drain, or the sufficient outlet, that's how far they'll take it. There are other cases where to drain a portion of land or to provide an outlet for that property, they've had to go 5 kilometers. So it really varies on where sufficient outlet is and where the area requiring drainage is.
Any other questions? What's the most common reason for a drain to fail? Is it collapse? or is it overgrown? Is it roots? What makes a drain collapse most often?
Through you, Mr. Chair. A lot of the old tile drains have outlived their lifespan. So the concrete tile most often used in drainage projects in the 60s are definitely not reinforced with any steel, so they're just concrete, and they only have a certain lifespan, generally 40 to 60 years, mostly 50. So we're seeing a lot of those older tile systems are undersized, operating under pressure now, and they've outlived their life cycle. So they need to be updated because they don't have the capacity that farmers need to tile in, and they're also falling apart. When it comes to open systems, generally the only time open systems are deepened is to accommodate any tiling coming in. So you could have a property owner that wants to systematically tile their property, but in order to have their tiles deep enough, as per the contractor's design, they need to deepen the municipal drain to get that 1 foot of freeboard that's typical of what you would see at the end of a tiling system.
So when you're buying a house, you should really do your research so that the horse farm on the hill in Mount Pleasant doesn't drain into your basement. In fact, just because it happened to me. So these things are something you should know when you purchase property. So there is a mapping of all of that somewhere.
Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. The Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs has a mapping tool called Ag Maps or Ag Atlas, and it's online. It shows it's not 100% accurate all the time because they rely on drainage superintendents across Ontario to submit all their drain mapping information, but it shows many of the municipal drains. And then another good person to talk to would be the drainage superintendent for that township or municipality, because most have their own mapping tools that show watersheds as well. So if purchasing a property, you find yourself out in the country and really like a property, it's always best practice to talk to your drainage superintendent to see whether or not you are assessed into any of these drains.
And do real estate people have to bring that forward? Do they have to disclose that? No.
There's no requirement to disclose that there's a drain on the property or that you're assessed into a watershed.
That's tricky. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm thinking back to the story that Rob Walton told towards the beginning of this about the north of the fairgrounds, and so I'm wondering, most of what you're talking about is primarily agricultural properties, but is stormwater management in residential areas a cousin to all of this? Like, is there a dotted line between municipal drains and stormwater management, or is it all under the same umbrella? Is it two separate umbrellas? I'm just kind of wondering the connection on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe they serve the same purpose, but municipal drains are primarily and 100% under this Drainage Act. They must be under this Ontario legislation, the Drainage Act. They have to have a list of things included in the engineer's report, and then they have to be adopted by bylaw and given third reading and constructed in accordance with this design. Stormwater management facilities and storm sewers do not have that requirement, so they're two separate entities, but they serve the same purpose. One is primarily to solve drainage problems in agricultural situations between neighbors who can't get along, whereas storm sewers are infrastructure that is planned into a city.
Thanks.
Rob?
Councillor Chambers?
Just if I could just add something to that a lot of people don't understand, is that municipal drains, maintenance and are paid for by the people assessed on the drain. Stormwater sewers in Paris, for example, that's not assessed to the property owners, it's paid for by the Public Works.
Mr. Walton.
Through Mr. Chair to the committee, every chance I've got to talk about this, I've talked about, so I'm going to talk about it again. So in this first year of this term of council, we are going to bring a report to council on the whole idea of what we do under municipal drains, what we do under the tax system for drains, and this idea of possibly bringing in a stormwater utility where we actually treat storm sewers like utility and collect a normal fee for that, probably on our water and wastewater bill, so we actually fund them through that and not off of taxation. And that actually levels the playing field in this, because then people in the rural areas that pay for these as assessed on municipal drains and pay for the maintenance on it, they also pay taxation, which actually helps to pay for the other ones, which are covered in taxation. I think there's an equity there, and it'd be really interesting right now. I'll have to say that I think that 1990 Northwest drain was beautifully designed. Probably has had very little maintenance done on it, because it was, it was a big open gravel pit. It's system designed not to require much maintenance. But if we had to go in there and do $100,000 worth of work, we'd have to bill that right now to those upstream landowners, and they would have no idea what that was, and they would actually oppose that vehemently. And if we bring this new system in, we would put them under the charge of the stormwater utility. They pay us, a few dollars a month, and then that would cover their cost for that drain. So you're going to see that report coming up at a future policy and strategic direction meeting, and then we'll make some decisions as to where that goes after that. Thank you.
Councillor Chambers?
I was going to say, hopefully I'm going to be off council when that report comes. It sounds like that'll be an interesting discussion. I'm just wondering if Greg and our drainage superintendent would comment on the advisability of a proactive response to drainage maintenance rather than a reactive response to maintenance maintenance, because we are changing that philosophy in the last couple of years.
Through the mayor, yes, Councillor Chambers, this is definitely a new direction for us. And through this, our approach is going to be a lot of communication. A lot of people have had drains on their land, municipal drains on their land for a generation, and haven't received any work because it was never requested. But through my discussions, when I was trying to understand the process and the costing of these drains, being very mindful that the residents had to pay for this work, it wasn't part of their normal taxation. I want to make sure we're doing the right thing. So I looked at the business case, and Shannon again helped me understand it. When you do reactive maintenance, you're usually going in and just fixing a problem, and then everyone pays for that in the shed. And you can keep returning to the same system, fixing little problems, but never addressing the big issue. So then you get to a point where then you got to come in and look after the big issue. Well, now you're removing trees that have been growing for 40, 60 years. The sediment in the bottom of these drains is 3-4 feet above what it should be. All of that has to be hauled away, and that's at a greater cost, where we could be $30, $32 a meter. Yeah. So right now we're averaging $30 to $35 a meter, linear meter, to clean out these drains, because they have not been getting the routine maintenance that they're supposed to. So through communication with residents, we've done well so far. And the big thing is about it, when we get the for the new drains, when we get the maintenance recommendations back from the engineer, that we follow those schedules, because we've seen our neighbors to the south of us that have a proactive drainage program. And right now, when we're paying $30 to $35 a meter for some of these that have gone for a long time without maintenance, they're showing $4 to $6 a meter to do the maintenance. So that's where we fall in as municipal staff, as managers of these drains, to work with our residents to make sure that the maintenance is followed. Through this mapping and the GIS, a schedule will be set moving forward. Now that I'm involved in this and Shannon's involved with this, this is the vision that we have, that these schedules will no longer be bypassed or put off till later. We'll follow what the recommendations are. But the big thing is we've got some hurdles to get to bring these municipal drains back up to the standard that they were designed at.
Thank
Does
you.
that answer the question?
Thank you. I think so. Councillor Miller, you're next.
Just along that point, great. Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Bell mentioned, was asking about, our municipal drains there for the benefit of the landowner, and I think we all agree that they are. But it also helps our infrastructure, does it not? Because you don't have water now ponding where it shouldn't. We don't have freeze thaws as much. We don't have water going over roads where it shouldn't. Would you agree, Greg, that there's benefits to our infrastructure by having good drains?
Yes, through the mayor, definitely, most definitely. This is why when Shannon holds a public meeting, I actually attend or have attended as a stakeholder as the road authority. So with some of these, you will see in future budgets that come forward, there's going to be a drainage piece that we have a large stake in this, where we are, when the schedule comes out, we'll have sometimes in some of these projects the lion's share of the cost. And ours is not grantable because we are the road authority and we don't fall under the OMAFRA guidelines for those rebates. But yes, and it's actually very important for us to have this drainage, because if it stops at the road and starts crossing the road, then it's washing out our road and it just leads to bigger issues. So that's another reason why I feel it's important that we bring these drains back up to a modern, or the ones that are functioning fine, we bring them up to their maintenance schedule. Ones that are not functioning anymore due to development, global warming change, stuff like that, climate change, that we redesign them and bring them up to a drain that functions for today's society. Does that answer? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Coleman.
Could you repeat what you said, what it was costing our neighbors to the south and for maintenance and what we are paying?
Okay. So right now, some of the drains that we've been cleaning out, because there's extensive work, it's $30 to $35 a meter to clean them out, and then our neighbors to the south are realizing $4 to $6 a meter to have them cleaned out, and they're on the proactive approach. So we need to get there, I believe. That's my vision.
Further to that, Mr. Mayor, so that they've been on a proactive approach all along. Is that what you're telling us?
I'm not sure of that. Maybe Shannon can speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The neighbor we're speaking of, they were not always on a proactive approach, but they have been practicing this for the last, I'm not sure exactly the length of time, but what they've done is they've taken all the open drains that require maintenance in their county, they've put them on a rotating list, and every 5 to 7 years they inspect and brush. And then at that inspection brushing point, because the trees haven't become so big that now they have to hire people to chainsaw them down, they can still use the brushing attachments. They determine whether or not any sediment needs to be scooped out. And in the cases where there is some, they'll take it out so it doesn't accumulate to the point where they're taking out multiple feet at a time. The systems we're looking at maintaining right now, the ones we have maintained so far, most of them have not had any maintenance in 30 to 55 years. So they have gigantic trees that cost a lot to take down. And as Greg was saying, some have 4 feet of sediment to remove.
Councillor Chambers.
I'll just make a comment, and you may wish to comment on this. I'm not going to talk about specific property owners, but you alluded to the fact that the Bennett Municipal Drain is being reconstructed because it has fallen beyond its natural lifestyle. And the Bennett Drain is a long drain. It goes through a lot of agricultural property, but it also goes through the village of Harley. And the assessment schedules, and we've already given second reading to this, and we're coming back for the actually the third reading. We have to approve the drain, the Bennett Drain. I'm getting it mixed up with the one we're doing tonight. At any rate, some of the property owners are being supposedly proposing to be assessed at not hundreds of dollars, but thousands of dollars. And if you're a property owner that lives in Harley that has maybe a 5 or 6 acre parcel of land, you may be on the hook for $15,000, $20,000. And being on the assessment schedule, these people aren't usually happy about that. They don't have the recovery capacity that an agricultural operation has, so be prepared for some interesting discussions, and please to council with regard to some of these drains that have not been maintained for several years, and stay tuned on the Bennett drain, stay tuned on the Barker drain, which goes through Princeton, which is kind of the same thing, and we're going to be dealing with drains on a regular basis from what I can see if we're doing a proactive approach. And the reason that some of these drains get such terrible costs is because they've been allowed to dilapidate over the years without a proactive approach. So pay me now or pay me later.
Thank you. Well, it's good that we've had this training then, because I don't know that any of us knew this much about anything. So I'm glad that we're having this. It's very timely. Thank you. If you want to continue, I don't think there's any more questions for you.
Just to add a little bit more information on the proactive versus reactive approach, most of Ontario currently practices a reactive approach. So it's not that the county has been neglecting their duties. It's just a common practice that has been going on for years. Proactive approaches are few and far between. There are only a handful of municipalities that have taken that approach to drain maintenance. So certainly, I think these are great steps that we're taking as a county, but not necessarily should we be slapping or saying, why haven't we done better? So just to make that clear. So we had spoken about typical improvement examples, and there's some non-typical examples. So adding buffer strips to drain to help improve retention of soil on farming properties, any water control structures to keep water levels higher in wetlands, and any sedimentation ponds to collect sediment before it goes downstream. All of these things can be worked into engineers' reports, and they're not typical in the sense that you wouldn't think municipal drain, typically a trapezoidal ditch, but under the Drainage Act, you can incorporate all these things and into reports, adopt them by bylaw, and then have them constructed as part of a drain that they can be maintained in the future by the county or municipality. So the improvement is just, this is a definition out of the Act. Any modification or addition to a drainage works intended to increase the effectiveness of the system. So there are other management responsibilities as well. So severances, something we've implemented in the last little while, is anytime a severance application comes through, they check to see if any drainage watersheds are affected by it. If they are, under Section 65 of the Act, the clerk can contact an engineer to complete a severance to update that assessment schedule. So when it comes time to bill out costs for any future maintenance done on a system, we have those splits in the property ownership already recorded by an engineer. So the complete update of an assessment schedule, that's the Section 76 we spoke about earlier, and that it requires no construction or physical work. It is a paper exercise. Sometimes there are site visits to determine whether or not the watershed is correct, because under Section 76, not only are you updating that maintenance schedule to reflect any changes that have happened over time in that watershed, you can also correct any watershed issues. If something's been tiled in or out of a watershed, if there's been a big earth moving project somewhere and now that doesn't drain into the watershed, those things can be updated in a Section 76 report. We have two sections of enforcement under the Drainage Act. One is Section 80, and that's any blocking of a drain. So if someone has a really nice open system on their property and they decided they would like a duck pond, so they've put a dam in and they've created a nice little pond for them. Now it's backing up water, causing issues for tile drainage upstream. As a county, we can go out and enforce the landowner, enforce the removing of the blockage. We don't generally like to go that route, because when you have to give multiple warnings, and then if you go and take that blockage out yourself as county, we can assess those costs back to that landowner, but then they have appeal rights too, and it's better if we can work with that landowner to help them understand why that drain is there in the first place, what purpose it's serving, and how to accommodate some sort of duck pond in a different location on their property. Damaging a drain could be if someone has, that's section 82 of the Act, if someone knowingly damages a drain, we can hold them responsible to put that drain back to its original condition as per the engineer's report, so its original design. It could be someone has decided they don't want the open drain on their property anymore, so they put a tile in, but the tile's too small, and now there's all this damage caused to the upstream and downstream landowners. Those sections of the Act don't get used too often. It's always better to sort it out with the landowner than to follow the enforcement route. There's a drain abandonment. We might have one of those coming to council. Drain abandonments are usually done on drains that only serve one or two properties owned by the same person. Before 1960, before drains that only served one property were called lateral drains, engineers were able to put out many different little branches to serve one property's low spot or wet spot. When 1960 happened and the Drainage Act as we use it today came into effect, lateral drains were no longer allowed because it then became the responsibility of a landowner to get whatever low area or wet area in their property to their property line in order to outlet their water. We have one of those that possibly could be coming up on the Harley drainage system, which is just a little bit to the west of Harley, the area, the built-up area. And then managing connections, so they're more section 65 reports. So under sections 65.3 and 65.5, if someone has tiled into a drain or tiled out of a drain, those are the sections of the Act we would use to make sure that they are assessed their fair share into that watershed. So when future maintenance does occur, they can be assessed those costs. And that little red line that's up on the screen now shows what a watershed could look like for that system in particular, called the duck drain. And this is a screenshot from that Ag Atlas we had spoke about earlier that shows all the different drains throughout Ontario. So big question is, what is council's role in the Drainage Act? So the central roles are around administering the Act. So for new petition drains, the summary of council's responsibilities include being either for or against a new drainage project, make decisions on the petition when appointing an engineer, appointments to the Court of Revision, and passing a bylaw. For the management of municipal drains, if we have to go the route of enforcing or section 65s or section 76, section 78, that's when council's role becomes a little bit more involved. Section 74, the day-to-day maintenance of existing systems, council doesn't play as big of a role in that unless there are big issues that must come before council. So there are further training opportunities for council members if you're really interested in this. Ridgetown College puts on a one-day rural municipal drainage course, and it is, you can find it through that link there. They do it twice a year. Now we've come to the maintenance section. This is the drainage plan that Greg was very excited to share with everyone today. I am too, it's really nice. This plan, while a little difficult to see, if you are able to zoom in, the green lines highlight the sections of drain that have been cleaned out. So that's brushing, ditching, and leveling of spoil in 2022. There are 3 different red lines, and those are all our proposed cleanouts for 23, 24, and 25. These are all requests that have come in from landowners. Some of them are requests from before my time, and others are requests I have received since starting in 2021. For the drain cleanouts between 22 and 25, I have a little table here of the total kilometers completed. So in 21, I started, we cleaned about 2.5 kilometers of drain. That was only on 2 drains. Last year, we were able to clean out 22.2 kilometers on about 15 different drainage systems. These are not the full drainage systems themselves. Some of them are just portions of the system. In 23, so far to date, we've completed about 4.6 kilometers. That project is ongoing, but should be wrapping up March 14th. And we propose another 24.2, and the table speaks for itself. Some of the things we need to consider when cleaning out municipal drains is that we are responsible to have correspondence with regulatory authorities such as Departments of Fisheries and Oceans, conservation authorities, and MECP if any species at risk are identified. So it's not as simple as someone calls you up and says, can you clean out my drain? And then you say, sure, I'll hire someone, and then it's done within a couple of weeks. There's a process that takes approximately a year from the time they call to the time we are able to clean out the drain. And that also involves public consultation with other landowners along the watercourse, tendering out the project so that we get an appropriate price through what is now our pre-qualified list of contractors, as well as observing restricted timing windows. So departments of fisheries and oceans and conservation authorities have timing windows we can't work within so that it protects the sensitive species that spawn or use those systems. One of the most...
Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, sir. Before we get too far ahead with cleaning out the drains, that nice little map. So I'm just noticing all the reds to the kind of I guess it's the southwest. Is that methodically it's the southwest, or they're just are we plotting our way around the county, or are they just doors?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Most of our drains are in the former township of Burford. You can see all those light hatched blue areas. Those are all watersheds. So in the areas where you don't see any blue watersheds or the dark blue lines, we do not have municipal drainage infrastructure in those areas. The red lines focus more in the southern westerly part there, just I guess from I can't read. Maybe 8th concession south. I would say it's dumb luck. I've had requests come in on these drains, and so we've put them in the order that they've come up in.
No, I just wondering if you got an answer there with the blue that you see everything was kind of in that water. So thank you.
Through the chair, I'd just like to add, so that's sections that Shannon's had discussions, and to go back with some of the maintenance work that's being done on the drains, a lot of the residents are talking in the area about the work that's being done and the positive effects that it's having on their land. So we are actually getting more requests to have work done. And that's all part of the communications piece.
So we have completed other maintenance activities besides just strictly drainage cleanouts. Some of the things have been outlet repairs for tile systems, tile repairs, any blown out tiles that have happened in fields, culvert replacements, tile investigations with a camera and flushing truck, brushing of systems that were not ready to clean out yet, as well as beaver dam removal and trapping. So this list just shows those activities that have been completed in 22, as well as some that are slated for 23. Tile repairs, outlet repairs, beaver dam and trapping, tile investigations will remain a reactive approach. We don't need to fix a tile until it's broken. If it's not broken, don't fix it. So with the tile systems, until someone has an issue, we don't regularly monitor tiles. To have a camera crew and a flushing truck come out for one day can cost approximately $3,000 to $5,000. So it doesn't financially improve our systems by having that on a 5-year rotational schedule. That can be looked at again if council feels differently. I don't think that there's a benefit to doing that at this time. Beaver dam and trapping, that happens yearly on a lot of these systems. Beavers are a nuisance animal in our drainage projects, and we employ Hugh McIsaac right now to do most of the trapping.
Councillor Kyle.
Yeah, quick question through you, Mr. Mayor. So if I'm a landowner and I've got my farm property and it has one of the open municipal drains on it, are there rules in terms of what practices I can and can't do in the vicinity of that drain? So one thing that comes to mind for a specific example is livestock. So am I required to fence my livestock out of that ditch? Or like, is there a certain buffer area that needs to be on it? Or how does that work when kind of nobody sort of owns the drain?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Unless it is specifically written into an engineer's report, there is no requirement to fence cattle out of a drain. It is, however, a best management practice to keep livestock out of drains, to keep your farming practices back at least 1 to 3 meters from the edge of the drain. These are all things that when I speak with landowners, I encourage them to practice, but there's no ability to enforce those things unless it is specifically stated in the maintenance section of a report for a drain.
Councillor Chambers?
If I could just add to that, there are, I know Long Point has programs that assist with grants to fence drains and for cattle and that kind of stuff. I believe GRCA does as well, and the Rural Water Quality Program is used for things like that. And this is where we get to communication and speaking with farmers. Some farmers will disc right to the edge and to get that last row of corn in there, and others will have a buffer strip, and the buffer strip always pays off because it doesn't fill in your drain. And I was just going to make a comment with regard to the tile drain. Although we're not proactively doing that, if we do notice an area that has blowouts, obviously we're in fixing those as soon as we can, because a blowout, what happens then is the rest of the tile drain fills up with silt. So although we're not proactively doing that, there are some properties where the drain has fallen into a disrepair and the property owner doesn't care. And those are the properties that we need to be mindful of when we're talking about tile drainage.
Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. Drainage can be kind of an emotional issue, especially when you have a field that should be draining and is not draining, and you've got a certain window to get the crop in. It gets frustrating. There's costs associated with it, money involved. And I've seen some of the names that have come through, whether it's on the email, the phone calls, or the reports. And we have some pretty crusty landowners out there that Shannon has had to deal with. And in fact, I was so worried about the one, I actually insisted she take me on a field visit the one day. But I learned a lot that day. But I just want to say, Shannon has a very nice way of dealing with people. I get phone calls from landowners before they've met Shannon about the drainage, whatever. They meet Shannon and I never hear from them again. So she's, from my perspective, she's doing a very good job. So thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none? Unfortunately, I have to call another 5-minute recess. Back in 5 minutes. Thank you. We're now going to reconvene, and we're going to move on to number 3 on the agenda, and that's Mr. Walton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the last part of this council training session will be on class environmental assessments, and I'm going to do a brief introduction. I have Joe Murphy and Mark Eby with me here that are going to do the meat of the presentation. So I'm going to do a quick overview and talk a little bit about the role of council in Class EAs. So Class EAs have been a process followed by municipalities since 1987. I did research that, so I did get that date right. Actually, when I told you before the 1890s for municipal drains, it's actually 1835. There's been some act in Ontario to govern municipal drains, so I'll correct myself on that. This process for municipalities was developed by the Municipal Engineers Association in partnership with the Ministry of Environment, which is now the, as we know, MECP. And what it was at the time was a streamlined approach to project approvals based on project complexity and getting public and agency comments, and Indigenous consultation is required by all of these projects. The one good thing about municipal or about Class EA that I think that we're bringing into a lot of decisions we're making in municipalities is the 3 pillars of the decision, not just finances. You have to consider the environment, the social implications, and the finances in it. So it isn't just one lens you're looking at. You're looking at multiple things, and I think that that's a very good thing to do. Just a little bit about the council role. So all municipal infrastructure projects must follow the Class EA. So you start the projects by putting them in the budget. Now, most of these, the Class EA, and Joe and Mark are going to go through this in detail. Until you get into the Schedule B and C projects, really the part of it that you're dealing with, you don't see, right? It happens outside of council's purview. Staff and consultants generally oversee the projects. Depending on the project, there's different ways that we would update you, council reports, and your attendance at consultation meetings. But what I'll stress is important that council follow the process through to a conclusion, right? Get the input, get all the, we had a great meeting on January 11th for Mile Hill. Now, there's people on that project that are diametrically opposed. You're either for the proposal or you're totally against the proposal. Not very much middle ground there, I don't think. But by going through that process, we've learned a lot that we would never know without talking to those people. There's one driveway there that's got great concerns out of that for them to get delivery of propane and whatever. That we need to know that. We need to, whatever we design, we probably need to do something there regardless of doing anything else. But we've put out a good message to the people there. 4,000 cars a day is probably unacceptable on this road, and to have the safety of everybody that uses that road. So how do we deal with that? We need to make some decisions before we get to that point. And these processes aren't always easy, but let's follow them through to their conclusion, and then gather all that information, the environment, the social implications, and the finances, and then make a decision. It'd be easy out on Mile Hill to say, yeah, if we had $5 million, we could solve this problem. But, there would be things, the environment that would not be acceptable, and socially probably not acceptable. And is that cost acceptable even? So, you need to consider all those things. At the end of the project, we get asked all these meetings, when do we get to vote on this project? Well, this is a process that doesn't involve voting until it comes to council for the acceptance of the study report. That's where the vote is on the project. So we gather input from everybody, and they freely, we try and get people to give their input, for or against, in the middle, whatever. And then, you put that together in that report. We do a council report and say, this is what is recommended to happen, and then a decision gets made. And that always initiates the 30-day public review period. In the new 30-day public review period, though, it is very interesting because really only First Nations have the right to ask for a bump up. And I'm not really sure why the province did that, but there have been very few bump ups ever granted by the Ministry of Environment in the past, though, anyways. So through the process, we gather the public, agency, and Indigenous consultation, and that input is essential to a good outcome. And that's the overview and council role. And I'm going to pass this on to Joe, I think.
Thanks, Rob. So, as Rob said, I'm Joe Murphy, Capital Project Manager. I work in the infrastructure group in operations out of the Burford office. I've worked on several class environmental assessments throughout my career, and so I'm going to go through kind of where the municipal class environmental assessment came from, and then we'll go through the schedules. So everything's rooted in the Environmental Assessment Act. Out of the Act, there's a couple processes. So there's class environmental assessment, which is a documented, standardized process for a group of projects which are routine and have predictable environmental effects that can be readily managed. So as you can see by this slide here, there are 11 different municipal class environmental assessment processes. We focus on the municipal class environmental assessment process. Most of our projects fall under that process. But we have done a couple projects harmonized with the provincial transportation facility process, specifically for the Rest Acres Road interchange and the Bishopsgate Road interchange. Other than class environmental assessments, if the projects are large and more complex, we go to an individual environmental assessment under the Act, which complies with Part 2 of the Act, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So that is an overview of the process there, very detailed, and probably nobody can read it because it's a little bit fuzzy. But there are 5 phases to the process. First phase, we identify the problem. Phase 2, we come up with solutions to that. We have public consultation. We screen for different parts of the environment, land use, financial aspects of whatever those solutions are going to impact. And we come up with a preferred solution. We then go, or a preliminary preferred solution. We then go to public consultation, which is typically public information center. And then at the end of that, we select our preferred solution. If it's a Schedule B, a smaller project, which I'll explain, we then go to documentation and a 30-day review period. If it's a Schedule C, a larger project, we go on to phase 3, where we do more detailed design concepts, basically follow the same process as phase 2 for those options. And then once we have a preferred design concept, move on to a more detailed documentation through an environmental study report, and then notice completion, the 30-day review period, which we'll talk about later as well. So here's a more simplified version of the same process. This does show the schedules: Schedule A and A+ projects, Schedule B projects, Schedule C projects, and master plans, and which phases apply. So Schedule A projects are projects that are pre-approved, typically include normal and emergency operational and maintenance activities. No consultation is required for Schedule A projects, even though we do typically hand out notices for many of those type of projects. So, but not all, but many of them. And then there is no documentation requirement for Schedule A projects either. Typical type of projects under Schedule A would be rural resurfacing, ditching, winter maintenance, or water and sewer repairs. Schedule A+ projects are the same. They're pre-approved, but they do require public notification. There is no documentation required, no detailed consultation. And those type of projects have a little bit more impact than the Schedule A projects. So there'd be things like urban resurfacing, sidewalk installations, water main or sewer repairs along a road, as long as it's within a road and doesn't require any property. And then road reconstructions, where the road is for the same purpose, use, capacity, and in the same location.
I was reading. Councillor Pierce.
Question in regards to Schedule A Plus. So it's
What we mean is, through you, Mayor, documentation of the process. So like in the Schedule B, you have to do your public consultation components and your evaluation of the options. Documentation of that. In a Schedule A, you don't have to document that stuff. You don't have to have options. Like typically when you sit down to do a project, you'll have, okay, we can do X, Y, Z, right? In a Schedule A, you don't have to document that. In a Schedule B or C, you will, right? Okay?
And just one more, when it talks about notification is required, there's no consultation. So that just means you get a letter in your mailbox or you do something with it or not, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Schedule B projects, so now we're getting into the larger projects. Typically are improvements and minor expansions of facilities, including roads. 2 points of contact are required, typically a PIC and the 30-day review period at the end of the process. The process is documented through a project file report. It's a less detailed report than a Schedule C, which we'll talk about. Typical Schedule B projects are those that require property acquisition, road construction where the road is for a different purpose, use, capacity, or in a different location, and under $2.4 million. Bridge construction under a specified value. I say specified value because it depends what kind of bridge it is, if it's over water or over a road or whatnot. It also has an asterisk there because EAs are not required for bridges that are under 40 years in age and do not have any heritage value. So when we start a bridge, we do a heritage value screening to see if it qualifies, and then we'll move on if an EA is required from that screening. Water and wastewater facilities, when a new building or addition to a building is required, it would trigger a Schedule B as well. County projects that would fall under Schedule B are the recently completed South Paris elevated tank and Powerline Road east of Rest Acres. So the widening of Powerline Road along the front of the sports complex was a Schedule B project. Schedule C projects, so we're getting more complex. Schedule C projects are new facilities or major expansions of existing facilities. They require 3 points of contact, so that'll be a PIC during your screening of solutions, and then another PIC typically during your screening of design concepts, and then your 30-day review period at the end of the process, similar to a Schedule B. Documentation is through a detailed environmental study report, which meets certain requirements of the actual process document. Types of Schedule C projects are road construction where the use, capacity, or location change and the value is over $2.4 million. Bridge projects over a specified value with the same heritage screening. New water systems with new wells and distribution systems, and new wastewater treatment plants or expansions beyond the existing rated capacity of those plants. Schedule C projects that we've done in the county here are Grand River Street North, the widening of that corridor. One's ongoing, the Canesville Water Wastewater Servicing Study, and the Paris Water Pollution Control Plant expansion, Class A. The next step in going more complex is into master plans. So master plans are EAs, or follow the EA process and look at land use planning and servicing of those lands. They need to satisfy phases 1 and 2. So you may have a master plan typically lays out several projects required for servicing of lands. You have to go through phases 1 and 2. Out of the master plan, you may have a dozen more projects where some may be satisfied by doing phases 1 and 2 as a Schedule B, or you may have to do a little bit more documentation as a Schedule B, or you carry on with the Schedule C, carry on through phases 3 and 4 to complete a Schedule C project under the master plan. Master plans in the county, we have the Paris Master Servicing Plan, the Transportation Master Plan, and the Burford Master Servicing Plan, which is underway. And the last process, the most complicated and for the most complex projects, are those that don't fall under the municipal Class CA process at all because of their size and complexity. An individual environmental assessment project is a project where the proponent needs to create their own terms of reference. So basically, you're creating your own process, and that process needs to be approved by the Ministry of Environment before you can move forward. Generally, the scope of these are larger and require more investigation and public consultation than are prescribed in the municipal class environmental assessment process. Currently, the only project I know that the county's worked on under an individual environmental assessment process is the Biggers Lane landfill expansion, and that is because the expansion exceeded 100,000 cubic meters. If it was under 100,000 cubic meters, it probably would have been done as a municipal Class CA, but because it's so large, the complexity and size of the project was much greater. So we talked about public consultation through these processes or through these schedules. So whenever so Schedule A and B don't require any public consultation. Schedule A plus does, or sorry, Schedule A and A plus don't require any public consultation, but B's and C's definitely do. You would initiate your process with a notice of study commencement. So that would be the initial notice that goes out in the paper. We also post on social media and the website, just as a kickoff, very general. In those notices, we typically do advertise for PI season at the same time, but the next optional point of contact would be our problem statement. You can have a public input on the problem statement or not. That's an option for us. Now, the mandatory points of contact are typically your PICs. So in Schedule B, you have your PIC, which is mandatory, and then you go through your evaluation and final documentation. Then you have your 30-day review period following a notice of completion. So typically before that notice of completion, there will be a report to council to make sure that council approves the document and the solution, and then everything goes out for a 30-day review. During the 30-day review, if there's anybody that's still opposed to the project or that we haven't addressed concerns through the consultation process, the public do have the ability to appeal to the ministry through a Part 2 order request. The Part 2 order request must come to the clerk and to the ministry at the same time. That is because our staff or the county are to work with those proponents to try and resolve those matters without ministry intervention. The minister does have a period of time to review the request for a Part 2 order, but it can be noted that Part 2 order requests from the ministry are very rare. And typically either the municipality resolves the matter or the matter raised by a resident or individual goes basically unaddressed. So, and I'll hand it off to Mark.
Councillor Pierce.
Thank you. I just wanted to just circle back to the Schedule B. It says Schedule B projects in the county, so elevation and R1 or lighting. With the Schedule B, would it look at for widening the road, for example, would it look at everything as to, what the width is going to be, whether there's going to be other intersections coming in, whether there's going to be street lights, that's all incorporated in that. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, so what would initiate a Schedule B project would be the road widening. So on that one, it was the road widening that initiated it. Intersection controls are not subject to Class A process. They are pre-approved processes, so they would be like a Schedule A process. So implementing traffic signals or a roundabout, turning lanes do not require Class A. Like they're Schedule A processes.
And what about street lights?
Street lights, like street lighting on the street.
Yeah, where I'm going at.
Yeah.
Last example here. So if we're going Powerline Road, I guess it's actually east of Whiting, between Whiting and Mile Hill.
Yep.
There's no lights there at all. And we're
So I'm just wondering, would that be looked at as part of an EA, or would that be a different process?
It would be, so it would be a Schedule A project, so it is pre-approved, so it could just go ahead without an EA. It's really during the EA process, if nobody typically brings it up as a concern, it doesn't typically get added to the project. It's similar to like the noise barrier walls that went in on Rest Acres Road. They went in certain areas because there was concerns in those areas, but it didn't go in everywhere, right? So street lighting would be looked at in the same way.
I think what you're asking, sorry, through the mayor, what you're asking about on that section of road potentially was just missed, that no one even thought about it until people started living there, and then they're like, wait a minute, it's kind of dark here, how come there's no streetlights?
Yeah,
but I think in the new stuff that we've done, like Rest Acres Road and Grand River Street North, we definitely included the entire streetscape with everything included to be considered. So when it goes forward, it's not necessarily like it needs to be a part of the EA. It's just that we're thinking about it, considering it at that stage to include it in costs, and when we go through for the design, that it'll be included.
Okay. So I'll take that conversation off.
I think we're already looking into what you're asking about, anyways, right?
Yeah. So Development Services is looking at street lights to the west and street lights to the east. I believe they're looking at those as part of the subdivision that's developing there.
There is lights in the subdivision, but like I say, it's that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's
there's the road realignment that's coming up for Potters, and I believe when they do the streetlights there, that it's supposed to extend all the way to Rest Acres.
Mr. Murphy, I think there's one more question from Councillor Bell. Oh, and Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Joe and to Mark. Going back to the statement in the Environmental Assessment Act, it says we're trying to provide for protection, conservation and wise management in Ontario of the environment. My observations, my experience of sitting in a lot of these public meetings is that the environment's hardly got anything to do with the conversation. It's more about personal public preferences, and so it's a pretty big umbrella that covers an awful lot of stuff, and it's not really just about the environment. It's more about, can we get the right concept that everybody can buy into before we start actually doing the project? Is that a fairer description of the practicality of it?
Through you to through the mayor to you. There are many different environments. So you're speaking about the natural environment. There's also the socioeconomic environment, and things like that. So there's you look at it. It's not just. I know we say the environment, and a lot of people go right to the natural environment, but we're talking cultural environment, socioeconomic environment, right? There's other components to the environment than just the natural environment. So.
Yeah, I like that description of it, Joe. Thank you.
So just add that through you, Mr. Mayor. And I think it depends on the project as well. If you're going to if you wanted to create a new road through farmland, bush, trees, swamp, and everything, and you wanted to put a new right of way in, that would, like, the environment would fall and probably take a bigger picture into like the decision making process or something like that, versus just trying to expand an existing road and widen it through an existing right-of-way area. Yeah. So not to say that it's not, it's just, I think depending, like a lot of what we've been doing, that portion of like that environmental piece is just different from what Joe was saying.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I think I'm glad we tackle it the way we do. So let me say that. But your very first slide said the process was developed by the Municipal Engineers Association in partnership with the Minister of the Environment. So its origins, I think, environmental, but we've used it for a much greater purpose. And if I may ask a second question, Joe, do you have timelines that we can have in our mind for these various categories of process? I've seen a few, so I've got some understanding of it. I'm not sure whether the new members of council perhaps understand some of the timelines that we've gone through. If I give an example of Rest Acres EA and the time it took us to get that nailed down, or even Grand River Street North EA, it's really important, I think, in terms of understanding the pace with which we can move big municipal projects through the funnel.
through the mayor to you. Yes, it depends on the size and complexity of the project. So I would say Grand River Street North, for the size and complexity of that project, went very fast, but it did take years, right? We have projects in St. George. We did the water and wastewater EAs in St. George, which started in 2014. The wastewater one was completed a couple years ago, but the water one is still not completed. We still have some things to sort out with the ministry. So it really depends on complexity of the project and kind of what, through your consultation with agencies and the public, what comes up and what you have to deal with. So.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I tried to get to every pick I can. And from my experience, I think when the public gives feedback, like you said, this is my experience. Staff have tried to take it into consideration, and if they can change things to make somebody happy without compromising the project, they do it. Is that a fair statement? Do you guys?
Through the mayor to you, yes. So public consultation is one criteria that we evaluate on, right? If we look at our typical Schedule B EA, there are very few criteria, and the public consultation plays a larger role. But if we look at something like Bishopsgate Road interchange, we had somewhere in the avenue of 75 options there, evaluated over like 120 different criteria. Like, so public consultation doesn't play as large a role in maybe that project, but it is something that they do in that project. We did do a sensitivity analysis where you crank up the public some of the public input so that it weighs heavier, and you see if you come out with a different preferred solution. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, right? So.
And just finishing up, Mr. Mayor, when people talk to me, I always refer them to Mark or to Joe, whoever. I always say, get your input in. Get your input in, because it makes a difference. Where I find the most frustrating part of the whole process with residents, and you see it all the time, is the project's already started, and then they see, oh, I didn't think this would happen, and then there's almost nothing you can do about it at that point. So never underestimate the importance of, I think, these picks and getting people to give their feedback, because that's the time to do it before the shovels are in the ground.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Howes is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mark and Joe. My question and comment kind of piggybacks on both Councillor Bell's and Councillor Miller's. I just to take it a step further, my observations in the last few years, and having watched the Grand River Street North EA even before I was on council, I think it started before I was on council, and I think the public there's a real potential for the public having a misconception of the environmental assessment, and I would like to, based on, and that's based on kind of some of John Bell's questions or comments, but I do think that a lot of people, when they hear that there's going to be an environmental assessment about a roundabout at Bishopsgate or whatever, the first reaction is to think about the natural environment. I think that's just human nature, and because of that, I think there's a potential of people not necessarily paying attention the way we would hope, and because they're thinking, oh, they're going to put a roundabout at Bishopsgate, and there's an environmental assessment, and I'm not worried about trees in that area, or I'm not worried about displacing animals in that area, or whatever. So I'm not going to pay attention to it. And then halfway through the process, they realize there's going to be a roundabout at Bishopsgate, and then they're like, oh, then they're upset that they weren't consulted. Or so. My point is just I would urge our staff and our communications staff to take every possible step to educate people on the front end that even though we have to call it an environmental assessment, it's not about the natural environment. It's a project study, basically. And I just wanted to reinforce that, because I do think a lot of residents don't necessarily get it when they hear the words environmental assessment, and I can understand why.
Thanks, Councillor House. Is there any other questions? You want to keep going?
Yes, because I have to go and get my kids soon. So just to reiterate what we've already talked about through the public consultation portion, Schedule A, no consultation. A+, notify affected parties. B, 2 points of contact. C, 3 points of contact. The one different point here is that the points of consultation is determined by the proponent. So as the county, we can decide what types of those contact will be, and it depends on the project. A bridge project that is out in the countryside that doesn't have a lot of people around it but requires a Schedule B, and it says that we have to, you have to do that other public consultation, we can do an online public consultation. We can put up signboards at the bridge itself to advise people that the public consultation process is ongoing, deliver flyers to them so they're aware that they can go to the Engage Brant website or something else to get the information, because really hosting an in-person meeting someplace near to that probably isn't going to do a lot. So just so you're aware, we can make the determination as to what is necessary depending on the project and how best to reach the general public on that project itself. So in the past, the public information the PICs are talking about were always held in person, typically at a venue large enough to hold everybody interested in attending, close to the project site, and then they can be hit and miss as to who shows up, right? The Grand River Street North Hall, very well attended. The place was packed. When we did the Paris flood mitigation in the same venue with, in Paris again, very, very little attendance for that one. Even though it still is going to impact people a significant amount. I think going back to what Councillor House said is they didn't really understand what we were up to. As much as we tried to provide them notice as what we're going to do, it just didn't really garner that same kind of support. So due to the pandemic, we had to come up with a different way to do the public consultation piece. So the nice thing is that the Engage Brant had already started during that piece. So it's now like the one-stop shop for all of the information within the county that needs any public input on. So through in the Engage Brant site, we can request public feedback, we can use surveys, ask a question, share your thoughts. It says who the county staff are that are listening, so you can email them direct if you want to. And then all the information for that project is all located in one location. If they get a phone call or somebody phones into one of the offices and they're looking for information, it's very easy for frontline staff to direct them back to the Engage website and try to find it there first before going any other route. And then we've now done some multiple PICs online with varying levels of success. Cedar Street, small number of attendees, but it was very well attended because it was directly, people that were in attendance were affected because they lived on the street. Transportation Master Plan, the Kanesville Water Wastewater Servicing Study, also been online because it'd obviously be very difficult to, where would you host one where it's such a larger area? They have not been as well attended. We will be hosting, hopefully, the Kanesville one that we have the next one in person. And then the Burford, we did a hybrid where we did the information session online and then also followed up with a in-person one that you had to sign up for attendance. So we're trying to change how we're setting things up and to garner more support and interest and feedback from the public. Also in the past, the meetings themselves were generally facilitated by either county staff or somebody from the consultant group. With more complex meetings, we've gone to a third party. We've been using Glenn Potier. He does a fantastic job. Yeah, it's night and day. As much as Rob's done them, I've been party them as well, and you try to do the best you can. Having that third party has been very good. And the one nice thing about even when we've done the online ones is we have staff in the background. So when people are typing in their questions, we have staff kind of trying to collate those questions. So if one question comes up multiple times, it only needs to be asked and answered once. Whereas sometimes we've gone through and anyone that attended the Grand River Street North one at the Ag Hall, when we got down to it, there was probably, you know, like half the people in attendance wanted to get up and ask us how come we hadn't built the East Bypass Bridge yet. And there was about 10 that all went up in a row and asked the exact same question that we had to answer. So there are some benefits for doing things both ways. So that brings us to the end.
Questions from Mark? Councillor Chambers, you're first.
Just two questions. First question, how do we distinguish between in-house EAs and external consultant EAs? What's the criteria that we use there?
They both run under the same process. So there's no change, but we've done very few in-house, like Cedar Street we did in-house and with some help from a consultant. That's about as close as we've got to running a large, like a Schedule B on our own, I believe. Most of the time, if it gets to a Schedule B, we're actually bringing in a consultant to do that work. But the A and the A plus is, like as we've talked about, they're pre-approved, so there's no it's just decided because based on the criteria that we don't have to do anything further, and that's done in-house.
Just comment on this statement. There's a school of thought that EAs are expensive to do by hiring consultants, and if we can avoid consultants and do as much as we can in-house, it saves a lot of money. Do you want to comment on that?
I can, yes. We do not have enough staff and the staff of the right knowledge base and everything else to run an EA. Most of these AAs successfully, whereas consultants have multiple staff and they do them all the time, and it is actually more efficient. They seem like they're expensive, but for us to run a multi-year EA with our own internal staff, it would cost us just as much or more to have those staff on.
Thank you.
Through the mayor to Councillor Chambers. So in the past, recently we've done two, as Mark said, Cedar Street we did, and the Governor's Road one through the pit. Which, pardon? We still have to finish. No, it's finished. That's finished. And so mostly it's but on all the ones we even do in-house, you have to have, there are sub-consultants you have to bring in for the specialists. So we have the staff to do some of the simple ones that we'll pick that up and do them as we can. And then the more complex ones, like obviously the wastewater treatment plant class EAs and whatever, those are a job for the consultants for sure. And the good thing is that we actually have the staff now to actually manage these in-house. So we do have staff members that are particularly appointed to them, and they're managing the day-to-day operations, which actually saves us money too. When you hire the consultants, you have them do the whole thing. You're paying for everything that happens on that, and we're doing our best to manage that.
And my other question is, just yesterday there was a press release from the province. Maybe you're aware of this, maybe you're not. That today, which was yesterday, they're proposing legislation that would bring efficiency changes to the environmental assessment process. It goes on to say that the government is modernizing its almost 50-year-old environmental assessment process that is too slow, too costly, and too burdensome. The proposed changes will help projects get built faster without compromising environmental standards and protections. Are we in for a big change?
Through the mayor to Councillor Chambers. So if they're implementing the changes that the Municipal Engineers Association, the MECP, have been working on for a number of years, I don't think that that's the case, and I haven't seen the press release, so I'll have to delve into that to answer that correctly. There has been some things they've been talking about for quite a while of changing, and I'm anticipating this is what they're actually doing.
They were talking about waiving the 30-day waiting period.
Well, the 30-day review period has changed already. Like, really, as I said before, First Nations are really the only ones that can have a bump up anymore. So that already happened, 2 years ago, I think, something like that. But there was a number of other changes that have been talked about and bandied about being made change that I'm not sure how any of them are that big, unless there's some new thing that I haven't seen. So we'll report back on that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, are you completely finished, Mr. Walton? You know what? That was a very good session. I think we all learned a great deal. knowing that we're going to gather in this room at 6 o'clock as a new council, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn, and I have one in Councillor Oakley,